I was never one for big, showy moments. I liked my celebrations small, quiet dinners, close friends, nothing too flashy. But my family? They were the opposite. Any chance to dress up, clink glasses, and hear themselves talk, they were all over it. So when I graduated with my master's degree in engineering at 25, I should have known what was coming. A fancy dinner at the most expensive steakhouse in the city, wine flowing like it was free, my parents holding court like they'd earned the degree themselves. And me, stuck at the center of it, trying to smile while chewing my way through overpriced filet mignon and even more overpriced compliments. My name's Caleb, and up until a few months ago, I thought I came from a pretty normal, if a little loud, upper-middle-class family. We weren't rich, not yacht rich or anything, but we never struggled. Nice cars, private school, vacations once or twice a year. My dad's in commercial real estate. My mom runs a boutique PR firm out of our house. I always knew we were comfortable. What I didn't know was that there were layers, deep, ugly layers, beneath the surface that were kept carefully hidden, especially when it came to money, and more specifically my money. Let me back up a little. Growing up, I always thought my grandma Irene, my dad's mom, was kind of an odd one. She was proper to a fault, the type of woman who wore pearls to the grocery store and never let you sit at the dinner table without a napkin in your lap. She had this serene, icy politeness that made her intimidating to most people, but I always got along with her. In her own quiet way, she liked me. I was the only grandkid who didn't complain about her classical music obsession or the fact that her house always smelled like lavender and mothballs. We'd play chess, drink tea, and she'd tell me stories about her childhood in London during the war. She wasn't warm, exactly, but she was consistent. Dependable. When I was 12, I overheard my mom talking to my dad late one night. She sounded annoyed. "Why does she have to make everything about him?" she said. "It's always Caleb this, Caleb that." You'd think he was the only grandchild she had. "Because he listens," my dad replied. "And he doesn't treat her like an antique." I remember feeling kind of proud hearing that. Like I'd passed some invisible test I didn't know I was taking. But then high school happened, and everything started to shift. My younger sister, Natalie, 2 years my junior, was always more of a firecracker. Charismatic, dramatic, always the center of attention. She had this way of making everything feel like a performance. She wasn't mean exactly, but she knew how to manipulate a room, especially our parents. And somewhere between her sophomore year and my senior year, she became the obvious favorite. Suddenly, everything was about Natalie. Her dance recitals, her artistic spirit, her heartbreaks over boys she dated for 2 weeks. When she got a B in chemistry, it was the teacher's fault. When I got an A in calculus, it was, maybe you should have studied harder. At first I thought I was imagining it, but the favoritism became too obvious to ignore. Still, I kept my head down. I figured it wasn't worth the fight. I got into a good college, worked 2 jobs to help cover my own expenses, and didn't look back. Grandma Irene was one of the few who stayed in touch while I was away. She'd write long, neat letters on monogrammed stationery, updating me on her garden and what books she was reading. She never sent money, just thoughts, advice, and the occasional crossword puzzle she couldn't solve. I wrote back every time, even when I was swamped with finals or exhausted from double shifts at the bookstore. Then came grad school. I got a scholarship that covered part of my tuition, and I took out loans to cover the rest. I remember talking to my parents about it, hoping for a little help, maybe even a small loan with low or no interest. But they were oddly cold about it. "You're an adult now," my mom said. "We've done enough. Time to stand on your own," my dad added. It stung, but again, I let it go. I figured I wasn't entitled to anything, and honestly, I was used to doing things alone by then. Fast forward to my graduation dinner. My parents rented out the private room of a 5-star steakhouse downtown. It had one of those long, gleaming tables with too many forks, dim lighting, and a view of the skyline. My mom wore a sequin black dress and kept giving me these forced smiles like we were posing for a campaign ad. My dad slapped everyone on the back like he'd won something. Natalie was there, of course, draped in a designer gown, pretending to be mildly interested while texting under the table. The room was full of distant cousins I hadn't seen in years, my dad's business partners, a few family friends. It was excessive. I would have been fine with pizza and beer in a backyard, but apparently this was for appearances. I was mid-sip of sparkling water when Grandma Irene rose from her seat, and tapped her knife gently against her wine glass. The sound was delicate but commanding. Everyone turned to look. "I'd like to say a few words," she said, her voice steady and elegant. "Caleb, darling, I know you're not one for speeches, but I hope you'll indulge me." I smiled and nodded, not thinking much of it. She raised her glass a little higher. "I'm so proud of everything you've accomplished. You've worked hard, you've stayed grounded, and you've always been kind, even when others weren't. That's rare these days. And I'm especially proud of how responsibly you've handled the $2,750,000 I set aside for you all those years ago." The air changed. It was like the room had been holding its breath and suddenly forgot how to exhale. I froze, the glass in my hand halfway to my mouth. The blood drained from my face, and for a second I thought maybe I'd misheard her. "What?" I said, my voice low, barely audible. Grandma Irene smiled, mistaking my shock for humility. "Well, you've never been one to brag. But I think it's important to acknowledge your financial wisdom, especially with such a sizable trust fund. You've made me very proud." There was a long, terrible silence. My parents looked like they'd just seen a ghost. Natalie's jaw hung open in a perfectly dramatic O shape. One of my dad's friends coughed awkwardly. I looked at my grandmother, feeling the room spin around me. "What trust fund?" I asked. Her smile faded. "The one I set up for you when you were born," she said slowly. "The one I've been contributing to for the past 25 years. The one your parents have been managing on your behalf." And just like that, the silence turned from awkward to deadly. My mom's hand gripped the stem of her wine glass so tightly I thought it might snap. My dad let out a short, tense laugh, like he was trying to play it off. "Oh, Irene," he said quickly, "let's not bore everyone with finances. Let's enjoy the dinner." But it was too late. The room had turned cold. My pulse pounded in my ears. My hands were shaking. I looked from my grandma to my parents and back again, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. 2.7 million. And I had never seen a single dollar. I leaned back in my chair, suddenly feeling like a stranger at my own celebration. My mouth went dry. Questions swarmed my brain like angry bees. Where was the money? Why didn't I know about it? What had they done with it? But most importantly, how long had they been lying to me? That was the moment everything began to unravel. And I hadn't even touched dessert yet. I don't remember much about the rest of that dinner. I sat there frozen, heart pounding, staring at the perfectly folded napkin in my lap like it might have the answers. I was aware of people trying to steer the conversation back to safe topics. Someone made a comment about the wine, someone else complimented the filet, but it all sounded muffled, like I was underwater. Meanwhile, my parents wore these tight, forced smiles, and Grandma Irene, clearly confused by the reaction, glanced around the table like she'd misread the room entirely. When the waiter came around with dessert menus, I excused myself and walked straight to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and just stood there, staring at the graffiti on the inside of the door like it would help make sense of any of this. $2.75 million. My name. My trust fund. And I'd never even heard about it. After a few minutes, I texted my best friend Evan. "Dude, my grandma just announced at dinner that I have a $2.7 million trust fund. News to me." He responded in all caps. "What? Bro, what the actual heck?" I didn't reply. I just sat there, elbows on my knees, staring at the floor and trying to piece it all together. My parents had managed it. That's what she said. So where was it? When I finally came back to the table, most of the guests had moved on to dessert. The tension had diffused a little, but not for me. I was locked in, watching. My mom wouldn't meet my eyes. My dad was drinking faster than usual. Natalie was typing away on her phone like she couldn't wait to update her group chat. Grandma Irene, ever the picture of grace, tried to steer things back to normal. "So Caleb," she asked, "how is the new apartment? Are you finding the neighborhood safe?" I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, my mom cut in. "It's fine," she said, waving a hand. "It's a starter place, but he'll upgrade eventually. We told him not to overspend, especially with, you know." She trailed off. I raised an eyebrow. "Especially with what?" I asked. She flinched, just a little. "Oh, nothing. Just, you know, the economy. It's best to be cautious." I didn't push it then, but I knew something was wrong. I could feel it in my chest, like a splinter working its way deeper under the skin. We wrapped up dinner, took a few forced photos, and said goodnight to the guests. Grandma hugged me tight and whispered, "You've made me proud. darling." Then she was whisked away by her driver, leaving me standing next to my parents in the valet circle, still trying to breathe normally. "Can we talk?" I asked. My mom gave a brittle laugh. "Caleb, it's late. Let's not do this here. We can do it at home then." "I've got work in the morning," my dad muttered. "We'll talk later." "No," I said more firmly. "Now." There was a pause. My dad exhaled sharply. "Fine. Natalie, go home. We'll take Caleb back with us." She raised an eyebrow. "You serious? This is about the trust thing, isn't it?" "Go," my mom snapped. Natalie rolled her eyes and walked to her car like it was the biggest inconvenience of her life. The ride home was dead silent. I sat in the back seat like a kid again, staring at the back of their heads. My mom fiddled with her phone. My dad's grip on the steering wheel was tight. No music. No small talk. Just the low hum of the engine and the thrum of my pulse in my ears. When we got to the house, I walked in first and sat down in the living room. They didn't offer me a drink. Didn't take off their coats. They stood across from me like they were about to deliver bad news. "I want the truth," I said. My mom crossed her arms. "Caleb, it's complicated." "No, it's not," I snapped. "Did Grandma set up a trust fund for me when I was born?" They exchanged a look. My dad spoke first. "Yes." "Have you been managing it?" "Yes." "And where is it now?" That was when my mom sat down, slowly, like her legs had given out. "It's gone," she said. My heart stopped. "What do you mean it's gone?" "We used it," she said softly. "For what?" "Life," my dad said. "You don't understand the pressure we were under. Private school tuition, the mortgage, your grandmother's medical bills." "She's still alive?" I interrupted. My mom's voice rose. "She had surgery last year. Caleb, do you think any of that was cheap? And your college? Do you think we just had that money lying around?" "I took out loans." I yelled. "I worked 2 jobs. You said you couldn't help me." "That's because the money was tied up," my dad said weakly. "We were keeping it for you. You were stealing it from me," I said. For years. There was silence. A thick, heavy silence that pressed down on everything. My mom wiped her eyes. "We didn't steal it. We borrowed from it." "Oh, really?" I said, standing up. "So you can pay it back?" More silence. "Can you?" I asked again. Neither of them spoke. I stared at them for a long time. And then I left. I walked out the door, got in my beat-up Civic, and drove back to my apartment. My phone buzzed nonstop. Text from Natalie, from my mom, a missed call from my dad. I ignored them all. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my tiny kitchen table, staring at my laptop, trying to understand what had just happened. I Googled trust fund mismanagement. Can parents legally take your trust fund? How to find out where your trust fund is. I read legal forums until my eyes blurred. I found stories of other people who'd had money stolen from them by their own families. Some won in court. Some didn't. It all came down to the documentation. And I had none. The next day, I called Grandma Irene. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Hello, dear." "Grandma," I said, voice shaking. "I need to talk to you. Alone." There was a pause. Then she said, "Come by at noon." I showed up early. She was waiting with tea and shortbread, like nothing had happened. "Sit," she said, and I did. I told her everything. To her credit, she didn't interrupt. Just sipped her tea, face calm, but eyes slowly narrowing as I went on. When I finished, she set her cup down and stood up. She walked into her study and returned with a thick manila folder. "These are the trust documents," she said. I kept my own copies. I opened it with trembling hands. There it was, my name, her signature, the dates, the statements. Everything. "And this line," she said, pointing to a paragraph in the middle, "states that your parents were to serve as temporary custodians until you turned 21. After that, you were supposed to be given full access." I looked up at her, stunned. "They never told me." "I know," she said. "You knew?" "I suspected," she said coolly. "When I stopped receiving quarterly updates from the bank, I assumed they'd transferred the assets. I asked your father about it once, and he brushed me off. I chose to believe the best. I won't make that mistake again." I sat back in my chair, dazed. "What do I do?" I asked. She gave me a long, measured look. "You let me handle it." I should have felt relief. But instead, I felt like the floor had just opened up under me. Because I knew, whatever Grandma Irene had planned next, it wasn't going to be pretty, and it was only the beginning. For the first time in my life, I saw Grandma Irene angry. Not loud angry. Not theatrical, shouting, flailing angry. That would have been easier. No, this was cold, deliberate, queen of ice anger. The kind that didn't burn but froze. The kind that didn't shout but whispered, and somehow that whisper made your bones shake. After handing me the trust documents, she spent the next hour making calls. I sat on her couch in a daze, listening as she spoke in calm, clipped tones to banks, lawyers, and a financial advisor named Henry who sounded like he'd just woken up, but instantly snapped to attention when she said her name. She didn't yell. She didn't even raise her voice. She just said things like, "I need a full forensic review of the withdrawals made from my grandson's trust. And if you find evidence of unauthorized transfers, I'll need options for legal recourse." Then she ended each call with a crisp, "Thank you," and wrote everything down in a little leather notebook she kept by the phone. When she finally sat back down beside me, she looked tired, but there was steel in her eyes. "Caleb," she said, folding her hands neatly, "I'm going to ask you something important. I need you to be honest." I nodded slowly. "Do you want to go after them?" I blinked. "You mean legally?" She nodded once. I hesitated. My heart was still raw. The betrayal hadn't even begun to scab over yet. A huge part of me wanted to scream yes, burn everything down, take them to court, expose them in front of the world. But another part, the tired, emotionally gutted part, just wanted to disappear, to be done with it, to start fresh and never speak to them again. "I don't know," I whispered. She didn't push me, just nodded and stood up, pressing a warm hand to my shoulder. "Then take your time. But don't wait forever. People like your parents, they count on hesitation. They build their power in silence. And I didn't raise you to be silent." I nodded, trying to hold back the tears stinging behind my eyes. The weeks that followed were some of the darkest of my life. I cut off contact with my parents. No calls, no texts, no awkward Sunday dinners. I blocked Natalie after she sent me a string of messages that ranged from, "You're overreacting," to, "Why are you trying to ruin our family?" to, "If you sue mom and dad, you're dead to me." I wish I could say I stayed strong, that I bounced back immediately and channeled my rage into productivity. But the truth was, I spiraled. I couldn't focus. I stopped job hunting. I stayed up late scrolling through forums about financial abuse, reading horror stories that felt all too familiar. My sleep schedule shattered. I lived on cereal and microwaved rice. My student loan statement sat unopened on my desk. I started ignoring my friends' calls, embarrassed that I didn't know how to answer the one question everyone was asking. "So what are you going to do now?" I didn't know. I didn't know who I was anymore. Everything I thought I'd earned, my degree, my independence, my pride in having made it on my own, suddenly felt hollow. I hadn't been building my life from scratch. I'd been robbed of the tools I was supposed to have. That trust fund could have changed everything. I could have graduated debt-free. Could have bought a place instead of paying rent to a landlord who didn't fix the heater. Could have invested, started a business, helped my friends, donated to causes I cared about. Instead, I was scraping together $40 for groceries while my parents had apparently been dipping into my inheritance for over a decade. It felt like drowning. But worse, it felt like being held underwater by the very people who were supposed to keep me afloat. And then, something shifted. It was slow, almost imperceptible at first. But I remember the exact moment it started. I was standing in line at the post office, waiting to mail a rent check because my landlord was too old school for online transfers. The guy in front of me, late 50s, tan windbreaker, kind eyes, accidentally dropped his envelope. I bent down to pick it up and handed it to him. He smiled and said, "You look like a sharp young man. What do you do?" The question made me freeze. I didn't know how to answer. Unemployed? Betrayed? Legally betrayed? But instead, I heard myself say, "I'm an engineer." And it hit me. I was still me. No matter what they'd taken, no matter how deeply they'd lied, I was still the guy who'd earned a double major while working nights. I was still the guy who fixed his friends' computers for free just because he liked figuring things out. I was still the guy Grandma Irene believed in enough to set aside millions for. I was an engineer, and no one could steal that from me. I went home that night and made a plan. Step 1, take care of myself. I started by cleaning my apartment, top to bottom. I bought real groceries, made real meals. I even opened those student loan statements, calculated exactly what I owed, and made a spreadsheet. It was sobering, but also clarifying. I'd been drifting. Now, at least, I had a starting point. Step 2, find a job. I reworked my resume, applied to everything I was qualified for, and even reached out to a few professors for references. One of them, Dr. Leong, my thesis advisor, wrote back immediately and invited me to speak on a panel at an engineering seminar the following week. You've got a good head on your shoulders, he wrote. Don't let bad people take that from you. Step 3. Protect my future. I met with Grandma Irene's financial advisor, Henry. He was sharp, older, and terrifyingly efficient. We're gathering statements, he told me. Once we know how much they withdrew, we can decide whether to press charges, demand repayment, or pursue civil litigation. I swallowed. And if the money's gone? He looked me in the eye. Then we go after the house, the cars, the businesses. If they spent your trust on themselves, we'll claw it back. For the first time in weeks, I exhaled. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted justice. During this period, I also found myself spending more time with Grandma Irene. She invited me over for tea twice a week. We played chess, talked politics. She even showed me old photo albums, sharing stories about her own battles with her family over inheritance, marriage, and independence. I wasn't supposed to go to university, she told me one afternoon, staring at a photo of herself in a black and white cap and gown. My father thought it was a waste of time, but I fought him, and I won. She looked up at me, eyes sharp. You come from a long line of stubborn people, Caleb. Use it. She also insisted on giving me a monthly stipend while the trust investigation unfolded. Not a handout, she said, a bridge. Think of it as a rebalancing, she said. They stole your head start. I'm giving you a running start. With her support, I was able to accept a job offer at a small but promising tech firm across town. The pay wasn't amazing, but the work was fascinating, and they respected me, valued me. That alone felt like a miracle. I threw myself into it, designing systems, solving problems, feeling like I mattered again. I even started building a little side project of my own, a budgeting app for young adults from unstable family backgrounds. Something I wished I'd had. And slowly, my confidence came back. Not all at once. Not in some movie-style training montage. But piece by piece. Day by day, I stopped flinching when I heard my mom's ringtone. I stopped doubting myself when I spoke in meetings. I started making plans, real ones, for the first time in months. I was still angry. Of course I was. There were nights when the rage flared back up and I found myself pacing the apartment, fists clenched, heart pounding. But there was something else now. Something stronger. Purpose. And that purpose only grew stronger when I got a call from Henry one rainy Thursday afternoon. We found it, he said. Found what? The paper trail. Your parents withdrew nearly $1.8 million over the past decade. Most of it funneled into private accounts, luxury purchases, and, get this, Natalie's college fund. My throat went dry. They paid for Natalie's school with my trust fund. Among other things, he said grimly. Vacations, renovations, a new BMW registered in your father's name. There's a clear pattern of misappropriation. I was silent for a long time. Then I said, what are my options? And Henry, bless his calm, legal soul, said, you've got plenty. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was anxious, but because for the first time, I was excited. Not to destroy them, but to reclaim what was mine. And maybe, just maybe, show them that their biggest mistake wasn't stealing from me. It was thinking I wouldn't fight back. And that fight, it was about to begin. I always thought revenge was about fire, about rage, heat, the thrill of tearing everything down. But when it finally came time to act, it didn't feel fiery at all. It felt cold, methodical, focused. I wasn't looking to destroy my family in some dramatic public spectacle. No, I wanted precision. I wanted truth. I wanted them to look me in the eye and understand exactly what they'd done, down to the last cent. And I wanted them to know that I was the one pulling the strings now. That the kid they thought would stay quiet, stay small, stay manageable, wasn't playing by their rules anymore. But first, I had to play it smart. Henry helped me put together a timeline, a forensic breakdown of every transaction they made from the trust over the last 10 years. With Grandma Irene's original documents and the updated banking records, we traced a full $1.82 million that had been spent without authorization. They'd made themselves the custodians of my future, and then spent it like it was their vacation fund. The real kicker? Nearly $400,000 had gone toward Natalie. Tuition, study abroad, even a $15,000 art grant listed under something called the Lillian Creative Exploration Fund, a nonprofit my mother apparently registered in her own name. She created a fake foundation? I asked Henry, horrified. He nodded. Looks like it. The only beneficiary was Natalie. It's textbook laundering. And that was when I realized this wasn't just betrayal. It wasn't even just theft. It was calculated. They hadn't stumbled into this. They hadn't borrowed a little here and there and lost track. No, they'd built a whole system to drain me dry while keeping me clueless. The college loans, the financial shutout, the guilt tripping, it was all part of the same quiet, ugly machine. I was done waiting. The first person I reached out to was Natalie. Not to yell, not to vent. I needed her to confirm what I already suspected. I waited until she posted on Instagram some smug photo of her posing in a rooftop pool with the caption, "Manifesting good vibes, only sparkles," and then called her. She answered on the third ring. "Well, look who finally unblocked me," she said, voice full of sugar and steel. "I need to ask you something," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "Did Mom and Dad ever tell you where your college money came from?" She laughed. "What, is this a quiz? I thought this was about the trust fund thing. Are you still sulking about that? Answer the question." She paused, clearly taken off guard by my tone. "I don't know," she said finally. "They said they had savings. That grandma helped, maybe." "Grandma never paid for your school," I said. "That money came from my trust fund." Silence. "You're lying," she said, but her voice cracked just enough to tell me she wasn't sure. "I have the paperwork," I replied. "Bank statements. Legal records. Mom created a fake grant to funnel the money." Another pause. Longer this time. "You think I knew?" she snapped. "I think you never asked." She hung up. That was fine. I wasn't looking for closure from her. But what I had gotten was confirmation. She didn't know. Which meant my parents had kept even her in the dark about just how deep the theft ran. That gave me a powerful advantage. The second step was gathering my allies. Grandma Irene was already in my corner. Henry, too. But I needed someone who understood the emotional terrain, the way my parents operated when backed into a corner. That's when I reached out to Aunt Marlene. Marlene was my dad's younger sister. She lived upstate, taught literature at a small liberal arts college, and had always been the family's black sheep. When I was a kid, she'd show up to Christmas dinners wearing combat boots and quoting Audre Lorde. She and my dad had fallen out years ago over some money thing, but I never knew the details. When I called her out of the blue, she didn't hesitate. "Sweetheart," she said, "if this is about money and your parents, I'm already listening." We met for lunch at a quiet Italian place halfway between our cities. Over steaming bowls of pasta, I told her everything. She didn't interrupt once. Just listened, brow furrowing deeper with every detail. When I finished, she set down her fork, wiped her mouth, and said, "They did the same thing to me." "What?" "When I was 21, she said, Dad set aside a small inheritance for me. Nothing close to yours, but enough to help me buy a condo. I never saw a dime. They convinced me it got eaten by taxes. I didn't have the documents to prove otherwise." I stared at her. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" "I did. Your grandmother didn't believe me. Or didn't want to. I think part of her couldn't imagine her son doing something like that." She leaned forward. "I believe you, Caleb. And if you want to go after them, I'm in." I swallowed hard. "I do. But I want to do it clean. Controlled. Not some messy lawsuit in the tabloids." Marlene smiled. "Then let's make a plan." We started small. Aunt Marlene dug up old family emails, holiday letters, anything with timelines that contradicted their story. Meanwhile, I met with Henry every week to tighten the legal noose. We drafted a formal demand for restitution, complete with itemized withdrawals, signature mismatches, and proof of forged authorizations. I was getting ready to send it when something unexpected happened. I got an email. From my father. Subject: "Let's talk. Caleb, your mother and I have been thinking about everything that's happened. We'd like to have a calm, respectful conversation. No lawyers. Just family. We're willing to discuss ways to make things right. Please let us know when you're available. Love, Dad." I stared at the message for a long time. It was classic damage control. They'd heard from someone, probably Natalie, that I was digging, and now they were trying to get ahead of it. To control the narrative. To spin it into a misunderstanding. I didn't reply. Instead, I invited them to brunch. Neutral territory. Public. Controlled. I chose a quiet place with big windows and a strict no-phone policy. I asked Grandma Irene to attend. She agreed without hesitation. And when Sunday morning rolled around, I walked into that cafe with a folder full of evidence, a quiet fury in my chest, and a plan. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to cry. I was going to reveal. They arrived 10 minutes late. My mom in pearls and a designer blazer. My dad in his "I'm a good guy" casual suit. Both of them wearing polite, brittle smiles like they were stepping into a negotiation. They didn't expect Grandma to be sitting next to me. Her presence threw them off immediately. "Mother," my dad said stiffly. "I'm here to listen," she replied. "And to watch." We ordered coffee. Small talk was attempted. I didn't bite. Finally, I opened the folder and slid it across the table. "This is a forensic record of every dollar withdrawn from my trust," I said, along with copies of the original documents stating that I was to be given full access at 21. Not 25. Not never. My dad opened his mouth. I raised a hand. "Don't. Just look." They read in silence. When they got to the part about the fake foundation, my mom paled. "You were never supposed to find this," she whispered. "Yeah," I said. "That's kind of the theme here." My dad looked up. "We can pay some of it back. Over time." "I'm not here to negotiate," I said. "I'm here to inform you of your options." My voice didn't shake. "Not once. You can agree to a full repayment schedule, with interest, or we go to court. If you fight me, I'll subpoena the foundation records, your tax returns, everything. I'll prove Natalie's education was funded through fraud. I'll go public if I have to. This ends one of two ways, with dignity or with exposure." Silence. My mom looked like she might faint. My dad was sweating through his collar. Grandma Irene leaned forward. "I told you when Caleb was born," she said coldly. "That money was a sacred promise. You broke it." Then she stood and walked out. I followed a minute later, leaving the folder behind. They had all the information. Now, the clock was ticking. Back at home, I didn't celebrate. Not yet. There was still work to do. But I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Control. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I wasn't playing defense. I was making moves, carefully, quietly, and with purpose. This wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about truth, about ownership, about setting the record straight. And whatever they chose next, whether to fight or fold, it wouldn't change the outcome. Because the setup was done. And the final act? It was coming. They didn't answer for 3 days. Not a word. Not a text. Not a weekly written email trying to minimize what they'd done. Just silence. And honestly, that silence spoke volumes. My parents, people who had micromanaged my life, talked over me, dismissed me, stolen from me, were suddenly, gloriously quiet. I knew that meant one thing. They were scared. And they should have been. Because I wasn't bluffing. On the 4th day, Henry filed the official demand for restitution with our attorney's letterhead, backed by over 100 pages of documented evidence. We sent it to their house by a certified mail. A week later, we received their lawyer's reply. It was a clumsy, thinly veiled attempt to settle. They offered to repay $500,000 over 10 years, without interest, contingent on me signing a non-disclosure agreement. We rejected it in under an hour. They tried again, this time raising it to $750,000, still with an NDA. I didn't even dignify that one with a response. Then came the threats. I got an email from a second lawyer, different firm, same tone, implying that I was damaging the family's reputation and that my case lacked sufficient legal standing. I sent it straight to Henry. He replied with one line. "They're bluffing. Let's go to court." But before we filed the civil suit, I pulled the one lever I knew they weren't expecting. I went public, not with a press conference, not some angry social media rant, just one clean letter. I wrote it carefully, no names, no vulgarity, just truth. I posted it on a well-trafficked legal advice forum and a financial abuse subreddit. The post was titled, "My parents spent my $2.7 million trust fund without telling me. Here's how I'm getting justice." It went viral within 24 hours. Tens of thousands of upvotes. Comments from lawyers, survivors, estranged kids. People shared their own stories, some hopeful, many heartbreaking. But the response was overwhelmingly on my side. And then the story caught traction outside Reddit. A journalist from a mid-tier finance blog messaged me, asking to do a piece. I agreed, anonymously, at first. But by the time it published, I was past the point of shame. I wanted my story out there. The article didn't name my parents. It didn't need to. Anyone who knew them knew it was them. 2 days later, Natalie called me. "You humiliated them," she spat. I stayed quiet. "They can't show their faces at the club. Dad lost a client. Mom hasn't left the house. You think I care?" You've destroyed our family." "No," I said. "They did. I'm just shining a light." She hung up. I haven't heard from her since. The civil suit was filed 1 week later. It made waves in our community. My dad's real estate network whispered. My mom's boutique clients evaporated almost overnight. No one wanted to be associated with someone accused of defrauding their own son. The discovery phase was brutal for them. Their financial records revealed everything. The BMW, the Hawaii trips, the tuition payments disguised as educational consulting, the trust fund disbursements laundered through shell accounts. It was all laid bare. We offered one last settlement, full repayment of the $1.82 million, plus 4% annual interest compounded over 10 years, no NDA. In exchange, I would agree not to pursue criminal charges or tax fraud investigations. They refused, so we went to court. The trial lasted 3 days. I testified. Calm, direct, no theatrics. I brought the trust documents, the banking records, Grandma Irene's notarized affidavit. Aunt Marlene even flew in to testify about what they'd done to her. My parents didn't testify. Their lawyer tried to paint it all as a misunderstanding. Said they were just trying to help me by managing the money responsibly. The judge didn't buy it. His verdict was swift and scathing. He ordered them to repay the full amount, with interest, within 120 days. He froze their assets, placed liens on their properties, and referred parts of the case to the state's tax fraud division for potential criminal investigation. They left the courtroom gray-faced and shaking. I walked out into the sun. The fallout was slow, but absolute. Their house, my childhood home, was listed within a month. So was the lake cabin they bought in 2017 with money they never should have touched. The country club revoked my father's membership quietly, without fanfare. My mom's PR firm shuttered after her last 2 clients pulled out. The once perfect image they curated for years, successful, classy, respectable, crumbled under the weight of what they'd done. As for Natalie, I heard she dropped out of grad school. Apparently, when the truth came out about how her scholarship had been funded, she lost access to her university's financial aid. I didn't gloat. I didn't reach out. I just moved forward. With the restitution finally in my hands, every cent accounted for, I did 3 things. First, I paid off every loan I had. School, car, medical, gone in a day. The feeling of logging in and seeing zeros across the board was surreal. Second, I donated $100,000 to a nonprofit that helps young adults escape financial abuse. I included a note for everyone who was never believed. You are not alone. Third, I started my own business. The budgeting app I'd built during my lowest months. I launched it for real. Hired a small team. Invested in development. Within 6 months, we hit our first milestone, 10,000 users. I named the company First Light because that's what it felt like, stepping out of a long, cold night into something new. Grandma Irene passed away peacefully in her sleep the following spring. She left me her estate. I stood at the graveside in a tailored suit she once bought me for interviews, clutching the last letter she wrote. It was short, handwritten in blue ink on her usual monogram stationery. They were never worthy of you. I hope you never let them dim your light again. You were always the best of us. Irene. I kept that letter in my wallet for a long time. Still have it, folded and worn. A reminder of who I was and who I became. All those years, I thought my parents were the architects of my life, that I had to bend around them, please them, survive them. But in the end, they taught me the most valuable lesson of all. That freedom comes when you stop asking for permission and start taking back what was always yours. I'm Sean, I'm 32, and for the most part, I like to stay out of drama. I'm not the type to pick fights or make a scene. I've always believed people show you who they are eventually. You just have to watch. That philosophy came in handy more than once growing up in my family, where appearances mattered more than reality, and quiet resentment simmered beneath every smile. My older brother, Darren, was always the loud one, the golden one, 2 years older than me, and somehow always center stage. He had the big personality, the jokes that everyone forced themselves to laugh at, the flashy stories that didn't always add up, but went unchallenged because, well, that's Darren. Our parents, especially our mom, treated him like he could do no wrong. Meanwhile, I played the role of the good kid in the background. I was the quiet one, the responsible one, the one who remembered to lock the doors and return the shopping cart. Not that it earned me much recognition. Growing up, Darren would do things like borrow my stuff without asking, blame me when things went missing, and my parents would shrug it off like, he's just being a big brother. If I so much as rolled my eyes at him, I'd get the whole respect your elders talk. I learned early to just keep my head down, work hard, and not expect fairness. In high school, Darren scraped by on charm and excuses, while I buried myself in books and part-time jobs. He crashed 2 of my parents' cars by the time he was 20. I bought my own at 22, and somehow they still acted like he was the accomplished one because he talked about starting a business someday. That someday turned into a decade of vague projects, failed side hustles, and a whole lot of almost moments. Meanwhile, I built a life that didn't make much noise. After college, I took a steady job in logistics, lived below my means, and spent weekends helping out at my uncle's property, an old family estate that needed upkeep. My uncle never married or had kids, and I'd always been close to him. He liked that I showed up without needing to be asked. He liked that I didn't treat the house like a free vacation spot, the way Darren did. When Uncle Mike passed away a year ago, he left everything to me. That came as a surprise to no one, really, except Darren, who called me the night after the will reading and said, "Wow, that must feel weird, huh? Getting something you didn't earn." I remember just staring at my phone after that. I didn't reply. I think something in me finally clicked off that night. I'd spent 31 years swallowing things like that from him, letting them pass, telling myself he didn't mean it that way, that he was insecure or jealous or whatever excuse I could come up with to keep the peace. But there's only so many times someone can undermine you before it stops feeling like brotherly ribbing and starts feeling like straight-up contempt. The thing about Darren is, he never fails quietly. When something in his life goes wrong, he doesn't just take the hit and regroup. He throws a tantrum or starts pointing fingers. And when he smells even a whiff of success on someone else, especially me, it curdles something in him. That became clear during our last family dinner. It was our mom's birthday. She wanted everyone together. It had been a while since we were all in the same room, and I knew I'd have to sit through Darren's latest plans for his crypto investing food truck gym hybrid or whatever he was on now. But I went, brought a gift, stayed polite. We had dinner at some overpriced place Mom picked, one of those restaurants with dim lighting, minimalist food, and loud tablecloths that cost more than my car insurance. The conversation was already rocky. Darren was 3 drinks in and talking over everyone, giving updates on a massive opportunity he had brewing, all while barely touching his plate. I mostly listened, smiled when necessary, nodded when appropriate. I'd gotten good at that. At one point, he started talking about how some people spend their whole lives working for other people, chasing security instead of success. His words, not even subtle. And then, right as the waiter was refilling our waters, he turned to me with that smug half-smile and said, "Isn't that right, Sean? You'd know. I mean, not everyone's cut out for ambition." He chuckled like he'd just made the most charming joke. Everyone else went quiet. My mom gave a tight little smile, like she was trying to pretend she didn't hear it. My dad looked at his fork, and I just took a sip of my drink. It was red wine. Dry, bitter. My mouth was dry too, but not from the wine. I didn't respond. Not out loud. But something about that moment felt different. I didn't feel embarrassed. I didn't feel the need to defend myself or prove him wrong. I just felt done. Done playing the quiet brother who lets things slide for the sake of family harmony. Done being the background character in my own life so Darren could keep his inflated sense of superiority. That dinner ended like all our family dinners do. Awkward hugs, half-hearted goodbyes, and promises to catch up soon. That no one means. But something had shifted. I could feel it. Darren had no idea what was coming, and I wasn't going to warn him. Let him keep talking. Let him feel big. Let him believe I was the failure. Because a week later, I got a call. From him. And that's where things started to get interesting. The call came on a Thursday. I remember because I was coming back from a supplier meeting, trying to beat traffic, and my phone buzzed with Darren's name just as I was pulling into my apartment garage. I stared at the screen for a second. I hadn't heard from him since the dinner, and part of me debated whether to even pick up. But curiosity won out. "Sean," he said, sounding chipper. "Hey man, got a sec?" I hadn't even said hello yet. "Sure," I said cautiously, parking the car and killing the engine. "What's up?" "So listen," he began, tone breezy, like we were lifelong pals who hadn't had a weird family dinner just days before. "You know I've been working on that new venture, right? The boutique fitness line. Custom apparel meets wellness content. Right. The one he'd barely mentioned during dinner in between swipes at my life choices. Yeah, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. Well, I finally secured a partner. Investor out of Austin. Guy's a beast. But we need to move fast, and I'm locking down the capital side now. Just need to finalize the bank loan. Super standard, nothing crazy, but they need someone to co-sign. Just formality. My stomach tightened. I knew exactly where this was going. He kept talking like he hadn't noticed the silence. The underwriter just needs someone with stable income, good credit, and some tied assets to sign on. Temporary. 6 months max. You wouldn't even feel it. No actual liability. I leaned back in the seat, staring at the garage ceiling. And you want me to co-sign? Yeah, he said, without a shred of hesitation. I mean, you're the obvious choice. You've got the house now, right? Uncle Mike's place? The deed's already transferred, isn't it? I didn't answer that directly. Instead, I said, why not ask Mom and Dad? Oh, come on. He laughed, like I'd made a joke. They're not going to sign anything. You know how Dad is with his credit score paranoia. And Mom, she'd have a nervous breakdown if you handed her a legal document. No offense, but you're the only one who actually owns anything. Or makes enough. You're set up. It's not even a favor, really, more like a temporary bridge. A bridge. That's how he saw me. A structure to walk over to get somewhere better. I said nothing for a beat. He added quickly, obviously I'll throw you some equity in the company once things take off. We're talking real valuation potential here. You'd be an early stakeholder. Win-win. That call ended with me telling him I'd think about it. Not because I needed time, I already knew what my answer was, but because I wanted him to stew. To let that desperation build just a little longer. He hung up assuming I'd cave. And that's the problem with Darren. He's lived his whole life assuming I'd always say yes, or at the very least, never say no. He got used to the idea of me being the fallback guy, the one who didn't argue, the one who bailed him out without asking questions. But I was getting real tired of that role. Still, the call opened a floodgate I hadn't prepared for. Over the next few days, I got texts from Mom. First casual. Hey sweetie, just wanted to check in. Darren said he mentioned something about a loan. Maybe you could help him out. Then more direct. He's finally got a real opportunity, Sean. This could be his big break. Don't be stubborn. Stubborn. That word stung a little. Then came the call from Dad, who rarely ever called. His tone was clipped, almost formal. I know Darren's had his missteps, he said, which was a hilarious understatement. But he's trying to turn a corner. Maybe you could support him. That's what family does, right? What family does. Interesting. I didn't recall Darren supporting me when I was working 2 jobs through college or when I was pulling 16-hour shifts during the supply chain crisis last year. He didn't even show up to Uncle Mike's funeral, claimed he was out of state on business, though I later saw tagged photos of him at a pool party that same weekend. But now I was the one being difficult. I didn't respond to any of it. Just let the silence do the work. I could feel the tension rising with each ignored message. But what really twisted the knife was what happened that Sunday. My parents invited me over for lunch. They framed it as casual. Mom even said, just some family time, nothing serious. But the second I walked into their house, I knew I'd walked into a setup. Darren was already there, perched on the living room couch like a smug peacock. He stood when he saw me, arms open like we were long-lost war buddies. Sean, good, you're here, he said, as if I were late to a meeting he'd scheduled. My parents smiled too wide. Mom had that desperate shine in her eyes that only ever came out when she was trying to smooth over something ugly with fake warmth. Dad clapped me on the back like we were teammates. The whole vibe was off. We sat down. Mom brought out iced tea and some cookies, and Darren launched into his pitch again, this time with slides. Literal slides on a tablet he had ready. I just want to show you the numbers, he said, tapping through charts and projections. We've got brand partnerships lined up. Influencer outreach scheduled. This thing's going to fly. I sipped my tea, watched him talk. Noticed the way he didn't once ask how I was doing or what I'd been up to. The conversation was entirely about him. His plans, his vision, his success, contingent, of course, on me co-signing a 5-figure loan. When he was done, he looked at me expectantly. So, he said, you in? I glanced at my parents. Mom was wringing her hands in her lap. Dad gave me a look that said, just go along with it. I set the glass down and said, I haven't decided. That wiped the smile off Darren's face. What's there to decide? He asked, like the concept of me needing time was insulting. I need to think it through, I repeated calmly. His jaw tightened. It's not like you're risking anything. Actually, I was. But more than that, I wasn't about to let him pretend this was a harmless little favor. I knew how Darren operated. If the business flopped, and statistically, most do, I'd be the one stuck holding the bag. And even if it didn't, he'd never give me credit for anything. I'd become part of his success story in the worst way, the invisible scaffolding that held him up while he bragged about being self-made. After that lunch, things got nastier. He started sending me links to articles about how to support your siblings and inspirational quotes about trusting your family. One even said, "Real brothers don't keep score." The irony made me laugh out loud. A few days later, I bumped into our cousin Elena at the grocery store. She greeted me with a hug and then casually said, "Hey, I heard you're making Darren jump through hoops for that loan. Kinda harsh, isn't it?" So he was running a PR campaign now. Even my Aunt Carol called me. Aunt Carol, who hadn't spoken to me in over a year since I didn't show up to her dog's birthday party. She launched into a speech about how families succeed together or fail together. I politely told her to go pet her schnauzer and hung up. Meanwhile, Darren started posting cryptic things on social media. It's always the ones you think will have your back who disappoint you the most. Lesson learned. And some people talk about loyalty. Others just drink wine and watch you drown. Wine. Real subtle. Friends started asking if we were okay. I told them the truth. We're brothers. That was enough of an explanation. The pressure campaign was working overtime. But what none of them knew, what even Darren didn't know, was that the bank had already reached out to me. Because yes, my name was on the deed. And yes, it was required for the loan. But they'd contacted me directly, as the primary title holder, to ask for verification and consent. I hadn't signed. I hadn't refused, either. I'd simply said, "Not at this time." And just like that, his application stalled. I didn't hear from him for 3 days. Total radio silence. Then, one evening, he showed up at my door. No warning. Just knocked, loud and fast, like he was entitled to be let in. I opened it and saw him standing there, hair a mess, eyes bloodshot, clutching a crumpled folder of paperwork. "Can we talk?" he asked. I stepped aside and let him in. Not because I owed him, but because I wanted to see how far he'd go. He paced around my living room like a caged animal, muttering about bureaucracy and timelines and idiots who don't understand vision. Eventually, he turned to me and said, "I need you to sign this today. If we don't get it through by Friday, the deal dies." I looked at the folder, then at him. "Why me, Darren?" I asked. "Really, why not go to your investor? Or get a smaller loan? Or scale down?" His mouth twisted. "Because they want a tangible asset behind it. And you have one. Uncle Mike gave it to you, not because you earned it, but because he pitied you. You were his project." I stood up, heart pounding. There it was. The truth. Not just entitlement, but disdain. He didn't see me as family. He saw me as a resource, a soft touch, a safety net. And in that moment, I made my decision. But I didn't say it out loud. Not yet. I just looked him dead in the eye and let the silence speak. And as I watched him shift, uncomfortable for the first time in a long time, I knew the real show was just beginning. Darren left my apartment that night with a tight jaw and a stiff nod, clutching the folder like it was his lifeline. He didn't say thank you, didn't apologize, didn't even pretend to respect my hesitation. He left assuming I'd come around, that I was just being dramatic, that I'd eventually do what I always did, bend. But something about that conversation stayed with me. I didn't sleep well that night. My mind kept going back to his words. "You didn't earn it. Uncle Mike pitied you." The nerve of that. After everything I'd done, visiting Uncle Mike every weekend, fixing the leaky roof, shoveling snow in the winter, organizing his medication, sitting with him when he got too tired to speak, Darren had the audacity to call that pity. As if I hadn't been the only one showing up. But what came next? That's what really broke me. 2 days passed with no word. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call from the bank. A different rep this time. The tone was professional, but a little confused. "Mr. Wexler," the woman said, "we received the updated deed document this morning with your digital signature confirming co-signature approval for Mr. Darren Wexler's loan. Just doing a routine follow-up to confirm submission was legitimate before processing." My stomach dropped. "I'm sorry," I said slowly. "What document?" "The updated property deed cosign agreement. It lists your electronic approval via DocuSign and was uploaded through the partner portal this morning. Timestamped at 9:42 a.m. My blood went cold. I never signed anything, I told her. I haven't touched a document. There was a pause on her end. I could hear her clicking through something. That's strange. It says the form was signed using your registered email and matching last 4 digits of your SSN. I'll go ahead and flag this for further verification. Thank you for confirming. I hung up, heart racing, and immediately opened my email. Nothing from DocuSign. No alerts. No requests. No confirmations. Then I checked my spam folder. And there it was. A single notification, timestamped at 9:42 a.m., confirming a signed document with my name on it. I clicked through, and my chest tightened. It was the deed cosign agreement. My name, my email, even my digital signature, copied from a prior form I'd signed years ago when transferring ownership of Uncle Mike's utilities. It was forged. I didn't even need to guess who did it. I opened a new tab and logged into my cloud storage, the one where I'd stored scanned PDFs of the house documents. The access history showed a login 3 days ago from a new device. A MacBook. Not mine. Darren. I remembered he'd borrowed my laptop once when his crashed. Must have saved the password somewhere. Or worse, he had snooped and grabbed copies of the original files without me knowing. My hands were shaking. Not out of fear. Not even anger. Disgust. He didn't even ask again. He just decided to take. He'd crossed a line I didn't think he was capable of crossing. And the worst part? He probably thought he could explain it away. Spin it into another misunderstanding. Something he could fix with a joke or a half apology. I called the bank immediately and filed a fraud report. I explained what happened. They froze the application and locked the digital access, pending investigation. They told me to expect a follow-up from their legal team. I spent the rest of that afternoon changing passwords, securing my accounts, and texting an old college friend who worked in IT security. He walked me through checking for malware and setting up alerts. I wasn't taking any chances. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, Mom called. Not to check on me. Not to ask if I was okay after learning her son committed fraud using my name. No. She called to yell, "Sean, what on earth did you tell the bank?" I blinked. What? Darren just called me in tears. You embarrassed him. You got his loan frozen. Why would you do that to him? My jaw dropped. Because he forged my signature. He committed fraud. He tried to use my identity without my consent. Maybe he made a mistake, she said, her voice shaking but not with concern, more like with desperation. You know how badly he needs this. He said you were dragging your feet, that you weren't being supportive. Mom, I said, trying to stay calm. He used my social security number. That's not a mistake. That's a felony. She didn't respond right away. I could hear her breathing, shallow and fast. Finally, she said, he's your brother. And I lost it. For how long does that excuse work? I snapped. How many times does he get to lie, steal, manipulate, and hide behind he's your brother? She was quiet. I could picture her in the kitchen, wringing a dish towel, eyes darting toward the doorway, hoping Dad would walk in and smooth things over. This isn't a squabble over toys, Mom, I continued. He committed actual identity fraud. I could lose my house over this. I could go to court. And you're calling to scold me. I'm not scolding, she began, but I cut her off. Yes, you are. You always do. You act like he's this fragile child who needs to be protected, and I'm the stone you throw at problems to make them disappear. That silenced her again. I have done everything right, I said, voice low. I've never asked you for anything. Not when I was broke. Not when Dad forgot my birthday 3 years in a row. Not when Uncle Mike got sick and I needed help. I never threw fits. I never stole. And yet somehow, every time Darren messes up, I'm the one who gets the guilt trip. Her voice was small. He's just struggling. He's been struggling for 12 years, I said. At what point do we call it what it is? She didn't answer. I hung up. I don't regret it. But I won't lie, it hurt. I sat on my couch for a long time after that, staring at the ceiling. Not angry, just hollow, like a balloon that had finally deflated after holding its shape for years. The next morning, my dad showed up at my door. He looked tired, older. His hair was more gray than I remembered. He didn't ask to come in, just stood there on the porch, hat in his hand. Your mother told me everything, he said quietly. I didn't say anything. I'm not here to defend what he did, he added. What he did was wrong. No excuse. That surprised me. Dad always played referee. He hated confrontation, especially when it involved choosing sides. Seeing him there, so solemn, felt like something had cracked. He looked past me, into my apartment. "You've done well," he said, almost like it hurt to admit it. "I don't say it enough." I nodded. "Thanks." Then he added, "But he's still your brother." And there it was again. That sentence. That unspoken rule. That ancient family code etched into every interaction we'd ever had. I didn't say anything. I just shut the door. Not hard. Not loud. Just firm. That night, I got a call from the bank again. They'd completed their preliminary investigation. The signature was indeed falsified. The metadata on the file confirmed it had been edited from a device that wasn't mine. They were freezing the application indefinitely and flagging Darren in their internal fraud database. They gave me the option of pressing charges. I told them I needed time to think, because deep down, some small, shrinking part of me still wanted to believe this could be salvaged. That Darren would call, apologize, explain. But that's not what happened. Instead, he doubled down. The next day, he posted a long rant on Facebook. It started with a vague, "Some people will always be jealous of those who take risks," and spiraled into a full-blown character assassination. He painted himself as the visionary, the dreamer, the one who was trying to lift himself up while I, the bitter younger brother, pulled him down out of spite. He didn't name me, but he didn't have to. Everyone knew. Comments poured in. Some supportive, some skeptical. But the one that gutted me was from our own cousin, Elena. Honestly, this tracks. Sean's always been kinda uptight. No offense. No offense. It was like my whole life had been rewritten by Darren's version. And people believed it. Because he said it louder, flashier, with more emojis. And all I had was the truth. But the truth didn't matter to people who were addicted to his drama, to the theatrics, to the carefully crafted story of the underdog older brother who just needed a little help from his stingy, bitter sibling. And that's when I realized this wasn't just a betrayal. This was war. After the Facebook post, everything got quiet, but not the kind of peaceful, resolved quiet. It was the heavy kind. Like the air before a storm. The kind of silence where every phone buzz makes you flinch, every knock on the door feels like it might come with bad news, and even the people who once smiled at you in passing suddenly look away like you're carrying something contagious. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't clap back or post some righteous thread defending myself. I didn't even comment on anyone's response, though I read all of them, twice. I saw the likes Darren's post got from old friends, second cousins, even people I hadn't spoken to since high school. It was like watching people walk past a burning house and toss a marshmallow on the way. But I stayed silent. Not because I was scared, but because I knew something Darren never had the patience to learn. People always reveal themselves, and the longer you stay still, the more they dance in front of you thinking they've already won. Still, that didn't mean it didn't hurt. There's something uniquely brutal about being painted as the villain in your own family. Especially when you've spent your whole life being the stable one, the reliable one. I was the guy who babysat cousins at the last minute, showed up early to weddings to help with the setup, and sent birthday cards when nobody else remembered. I'd always kept my head down, hoping that one day it would count for something, that my quiet loyalty would be recognized. But now, I was the bitter little brother, the jealous one, the failure who didn't want his brother to succeed. And the worst part? I didn't know who believed it. The calls stopped. Invitations to family get-togethers vanished. Aunts and uncles I used to see every few months suddenly weren't hosting this year. I found out from a neighbor that there had been a barbecue at my parents' house the previous weekend, one I was very clearly not invited to. My cousin James, who used to ask me for job references and interview tips, unfollowed me on LinkedIn. It was like someone had flipped a switch and I'd become radioactive. I tried to keep going with my life. I buried myself in work. Took extra shifts, offered to cover for a coworker going on paternity leave just so I'd have something, anything, to keep my mind from spinning in place. But it followed me home every night. I'd walk past the front room of Uncle Mike's house, the one I hadn't finished renovating yet, and feel a wave of guilt and bitterness. That room was supposed to be a library, a peaceful space, but all I saw now was everything I'd lost while trying to do things the right way. And then came the real gut punch. The county tax assessor's office sent me a letter saying there had been a formal inquiry filed disputing the legitimacy of the deed transfer on Uncle Mike's property. An anonymous claim alleging that the inheritance was inappropriately secured and in conflict with prior family expectations. I called the number listed. The woman on the line was polite but firm. She said the office was required to investigate all formal disputes, regardless of merit. She couldn't tell me who filed it, but she didn't need to. There was only one person petty, angry, and reckless enough to try to blow up the one thing in my life that actually mattered to me. I hung up, hands shaking. This wasn't just an attack. It was sabotage. And for the first time in years, I cried. Not just a few tears. I mean the kind of crying you do when it finally hits you that the people you've spent your whole life trying to make proud were never going to see you. Not really. That you were always going to be the backup, the utility, the silent support beam that no one noticed until it cracked under the weight of being everyone else's foundation. I didn't answer calls for days. I muted every group chat. I skipped a company happy hour I'd been looking forward to. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I just sat in that half-renovated library room, surrounded by paint cans and old books and the dust of a man who actually believed in me, and wondered how things had come to this. I felt like a stranger in my own story. That was rock bottom. But even then, something was shifting. A strange calm settled over me. It wasn't peace, exactly. It was more like resolve. A clarity that came not from inspiration, but from having absolutely nothing left to lose. That night, I went through Uncle Mike's files. I pulled out every document, his will, the title transfer, the notarized paperwork, every receipt from every time I paid for repairs or materials out of pocket. I made a digital folder and backed it up in 3 places. I booked an appointment with a real estate lawyer I'd met once during the transfer process. She remembered me. "You're the nephew who showed up in work boots," she said on the phone. "Come by. We'll get it sorted." I felt something stir in me. A heartbeat. The first flicker of momentum. Then I did something else, something small, but important. I made a list. It wasn't a revenge list, not exactly. Just a column of facts. Dates. Interactions. Screenshots. Bank statements. A paper trail. Not to use right away, but to have. Because if this was going to escalate, and I knew Darren well enough to assume it would, I wasn't going to be caught off guard again. And while I was doing that, I started quietly walking away. I unfriended people. Silently. No drama. No calls. Just gone. I deleted old text threads. Archived emails. Changed the locks. I went to a local cafe and met with an old friend I hadn't seen in a year. Someone who used to work with me before she moved on to a consulting firm. We sat by the window, drank coffee, and laughed about things unrelated to Darren, or my family, or the lawsuit I could feel looming on the horizon. That moment was the first I'd felt like myself in weeks. The next day, I got a text from my dad. "Can we talk?" I ignored it. He followed up with a voicemail. I didn't listen. Then a third message. "Your mother's very upset. Darren said you're hiring lawyers now. Do you really want to take this that far?" That far. As if I had been the one to forge signatures. As if I had been the one to file a fake complaint with the tax office. As if I had been the one dragging our family through the mud. I turned my phone off. For 2 full days. No messages. No drama. No updates. And in that silence, I remembered what it felt like to have peace. I started waking up early again, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I made breakfast. Real food. Eggs and toast, not just gas station coffee. I went for walks. I deleted Facebook. I stopped checking who was still in my corner and started building my own. By the time the lawyer called me back with the news that the dispute against my deed was officially dismissed due to lack of merit and clear ownership documentation, I didn't even smile. I just nodded. Of course it was. Darren's reach had always been shallow. Loud, yes, but shallow. His whole world was built on noise, and noise only works when people pay attention. I was done paying attention, but he wasn't done. A week after the dismissal, I found out Darren had taken a job with one of those influencer incubator startups. The kind that sells motivational merch and hustle lifestyle branding while bleeding investors dry. I knew it wouldn't last. But more importantly, I knew it meant he was still out there, trying to build something. Still trying to sell himself as a success. Which meant he still needed something. Credibility. And I was the one person left who could ruin that with a single conversation. I didn't do anything. Not yet. But I kept the folder open on my laptop. I kept the emails, the screenshots, the voicemail from the bank, the fake signature, the digital trail. I kept it all and waited. Because rock bottom doesn't mean you stay down. Sometimes, it's just where you stop sinking long enough to push off. Rock bottom didn't announce its exit. It didn't send a notice or leave a parting gift. It just slowly loosened its grip. I started noticing it in the quiet, mundane moments. Those little pockets of stillness that didn't feel like dread anymore. I'd wake up and, for once, not feel like I was bracing for an emotional sucker punch. I'd walk into work without feeling like I was dragging invisible chains behind me. Even the old hardwood floors in Uncle Mike's house didn't creak with that heavy, haunted tone anymore. They sounded like what they were, just floors. The house, which had become a symbol of conflict, started to feel like mine again. I repainted the library, the one room that had been left untouched during the chaos. I picked a deep navy blue for the walls and added warm amber lighting. I cleared out the old furniture and replaced it with pieces I found secondhand, solid wood, minimalist, comfortable. Then I built shelves, dozens of them, by hand. I used Uncle Mike's old tools, the ones I'd learned to use as a teenager under his supervision. Each night, I worked on those shelves, slowly restoring what had once been a room of solitude and turning it into something even better, something that would become the heart of the home. Meanwhile, my career began to shift. I didn't realize how much mental energy Darren had been draining from me until I felt it returning. I became more present at work, more proactive. I started offering ideas in meetings that I would have second-guessed before. I led a project reworking a supply chain system for one of our biggest clients, and it ended up saving them 11% in transportation costs. My manager took notice. So did the regional director. 3 months after that disastrous family barbecue I hadn't been invited to, I got promoted. Not just a raise, an actual title bump. Operations lead. With it came a bigger office, a flexible schedule, and enough clout that I was suddenly getting emails from people who used to ignore me. My opinion mattered. My presence mattered. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't just the dependable guy in the background. I was steering things. I didn't tell anyone in my family. Not because I wanted to be petty, but because it felt sacred. Like something that didn't need to be polluted by their reactions or buried under another Darren-centric conversation. It was mine. Around that same time, my social life began to quietly mend itself too. Remember that friend I met for coffee, the one who used to work with me? Her name's Ava. We'd always been close, but life had pulled us in different directions. After that catch-up, we started talking more, grabbing dinner once a week, then twice, then going on weekend hikes. She was one of the few people who never asked me to explain the situation with Darren. She didn't press for gossip or give me unsolicited advice. She just listened when I wanted to talk and let the silence sit comfortably when I didn't. 6 months after the forged document fiasco, she invited me to her sister's wedding as her +1. That night, while we were slow dancing under a string of fairy lights in a backyard full of tipsy strangers, she leaned in and said, "You're not nearly as invisible as you think you are, you know." That hit me harder than any insult Darren had ever thrown. Because she was right. I'd spent years fading into the background, thinking that being quiet meant being overlooked. But I was wrong. Quiet didn't mean weak. It didn't mean passive. It just meant I was saving my energy for things that mattered. And now? Now I had energy to spare. I started volunteering with a local mentorship program that paired professionals with high school seniors interested in logistics and operations careers. It felt good to pour into someone without an agenda, to answer questions from kids who reminded me of myself. Curious, cautious, unsure if they belonged in spaces that rarely made room for them. And the house. The house came alive. I finished the library and turned the guest room into a creative space. Not for me, necessarily, but for whoever might use it one day. I hosted a couple of coworkers for a small dinner party, something I never thought I'd do. We drank wine, the good kind this time, played cards, and shared stories without any competitive edge, no one trying to one-up the other. There was laughter in the house again. Real laughter. Even my neighbors, who'd kept their distance during the family drama, started waving when they saw me outside. One of them, a retired contractor named Glenn, offered to help me replace the fencing around the back garden. We spent weekends working on it together, and he ended up becoming something of a surrogate uncle figure. "You've got a good head on your shoulders," he told me one day, wiping sweat from his brow. "Don't let leeches make you forget that." Leeches. I didn't need to ask who he was referring to. By now, Darren had become a whisper in the wind. I heard little things, through mutual acquaintances, distant relatives, social media, I no longer followed but occasionally peeked at through burner tabs. His startup? Folded in 4 months. He blamed internal miscommunication and market instability. The truth? Investors pulled out when one of them found out about the flagged bank incident, something that had quietly followed him. It wasn't public, but in those circles, word spreads fast. His social media posts became more erratic, motivational quotes with passive-aggressive undertones, screenshots of bank apps cropped in just the right way to show balances, tagged photos at overpriced restaurants where he looked like he was trying too hard. He was spiraling. But unlike before, I wasn't circling with him. I let go. Completely. I stopped checking. Stopped wondering. Stopped hoping that maybe, just maybe, he'd come around and offer a real apology. That ship had sailed. I had new people in my life now. People who valued me not because they needed something from me, but because they saw me. Ava and I started dating officially. Slowly. Carefully. We both had scars, but we made space for each other's stories. One night, as we were walking back to my house from a neighborhood fair, she asked if I had any siblings. I hesitated for the briefest moment before saying, I used to. She didn't press, and I loved her for that. Then came the day that changed everything. It was late spring. The house smelled like fresh paint and coffee. I had the windows open, sunlight spilling into the kitchen. I was sipping tea and reviewing a mentorship application when my doorbell rang. Unexpected. I opened the door and froze. Darren. He looked smaller. Not in height, not physically, but in presence. The bravado was gone. He wore jeans and a wrinkled hoodie, hands shoved in his pockets. His eyes were tired. Not red, not puffy, just tired. I didn't say anything. Just stepped aside, silently inviting him in. He looked around the house like it was foreign territory, like he hadn't once joked about turning it into a rental property. Nice place, he muttered. I said nothing. He wandered to the edge of the library, leaned on the doorframe. His eyes swept the shelves, the armchairs, the rug. You finished it, he said. I nodded. He was quiet for a while. Then, I messed up. The words hung in the air. I know, I said. He turned to face me, expression unreadable. I just wanted to prove something, he added. To everyone. To myself. I thought if I got the business going, if I looked successful, maybe people would stop seeing me as the mess up. I stayed silent. He looked down at the floor. You were always the one who had it together, even when no one noticed. And I hated that. I hated that you never needed anyone. I almost laughed. I needed people, I said. I just stopped asking when I realized they wouldn't show up. That stung him. I could see it. He looked back at the shelves. I want to make it right, he said finally. I don't know how, but I'm trying. I let out a slow breath. This was the moment. The moment people dream about. When the villain lowers his sword, when the wounded brother apologizes, when things can finally be mended. But I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt powerful, not in a vengeful, lording over kind of way, but in a way that said, I survived you, and I don't need you anymore. I walked to the kitchen, poured another cup of tea, and returned to the living room. You want to make it right? I asked. He nodded eagerly. I handed him the cup, then sat down. Start by listening, I said, and don't interrupt. He sat across from me, cradling the cup of tea I gave him like it was a peace offering. I could see his hands trembling slightly as the steam rose between us, curling into the quiet. For the first time in my life, Darren didn't fill the silence. He just waited. I studied him for a moment, not just his expression, but the weight behind it. This wasn't the same Darren who used to strut into a room like the air was lucky to have him. There was a slump to his shoulders now, a drag in his voice. He looked like a man who'd finally run out of versions of himself to pretend to be. But I'd seen his apologies before. I'd watched him cry in front of our parents after crashing a car and somehow walk away with a new one. I'd watched him manipulate relatives into bankrolling his ventures with words like potential and next phase, while I paid my way through community college 2 shifts at a time. So while I could see the sincerity trying to crawl through his tired eyes, I also saw the flicker of calculation. And I wasn't about to forget who I was dealing with. I set my tea down. Start talking. He took a long breath. After the loan fell through, I tried to go solo. I pitched to some investors on my own, but one of them asked about my name being flagged in a fraud report. That's how I knew you'd reported it. I didn't say anything. I just waited. At first, I was angry, he admitted. Really angry. I told myself you were trying to ruin me. I even tried to Fix it, you know? Spin it. Make myself the victim. You mean lie? He flinched. Yeah, lie. And frame me. He couldn't meet my eyes. I filed the complaint with the tax office too, he added after a moment. I was desperate. I thought if I couldn't have the house, maybe I could make your life hard enough that you'd cave. There it was. The admission. He looked up, finally. I didn't think you'd fight back. You never used to. I leaned back in my chair. Maybe you never pushed hard enough before. That silence again. He sipped his tea, probably to stall. Then he said, I know I don't deserve another chance. I'm not asking for one. But I wanted you to know I'm trying. I started working at a logistics startup, just entry level. Real work. Regular hours. No shortcuts. I raised an eyebrow. They know your history? Yeah. I was honest this time. Told them about the bank situation, the failed ventures. They still hired me. I couldn't tell if that was redemption or recklessness on the company's part. Either way, something in my chest loosened slightly. I still didn't trust him, but I was intrigued. And then he said something that made me sit up. My manager? He's building out a new supplier vetting system. Said they're looking for someone experienced in contract operations, someone who understands both the logistics side and the risk mitigation side. I didn't respond, but my ears perked up. That was my specialty. Darren went on, unaware he'd just dropped a match into gasoline. He's been complaining about how hard it is to find someone who isn't just a spreadsheet monkey. He wants someone who can see patterns, anticipate failures before they happen. Said if I knew anyone like that, to let him know. That part almost made me laugh. I didn't know someone like that. Me. He looked at me then, probably hoping I'd bite. That I'd offer to meet his manager. Or ask for an intro. But I didn't. Because I wasn't interested in being handed an opportunity by Darren, even if he meant well. Still, I filed the information away. Not because I planned to exploit it, at least not yet, but because it confirmed something I'd quietly suspected for a while. I was finally entering rooms Darren couldn't talk his way into. And that changed everything. A few weeks passed. I kept living my life. Promotion settled in. Ava and I grew closer. She'd started leaving her scarf on the coat rack and her coffee mug on the sink like it was her house too. And I didn't mind at all. We weren't in a rush, but we were steady. Real. Darren kept his distance. Occasionally he'd send a short text, an article about supply chain tech, a hope you're well. Even a screenshot of his updated credit score, which, to be fair, had improved. I responded, but rarely. One-word replies. Deliberate coldness. Then one morning, I got an email from someone named Raphael Lyons. Subject, Strategic Vendor Expansion Initiative. It was from the company Darren worked at, the startup he'd mentioned. Raphael introduced himself as the regional operations lead and said he'd been referred by an employee who spoke highly of your logistics insight and systems expertise. There was no mention of Darren's name, but I knew. They wanted to schedule a call. I stared at the email for a long time. It would be easy to delete it, or ghost them, or say I wasn't interested. But then I remembered something Uncle Mike once told me. If you ever find yourself with the high ground, don't use it to gloat. Use it to decide who gets to climb. I scheduled the call. We talked. The conversation went well. Raphael was sharp, pragmatic, no nonsense, and focused. He wasn't interested in fluff or trendy jargon. He wanted results. Data. Infrastructure. I gave him both. We talked about streamlining procurement processes, optimizing vendor rotations, risk metrics, and KPI frameworks. 2 days later, they offered me a 6-month consulting contract. Independent. Flexible hours. Remote optional. More importantly, full access to their internal systems. I said yes. Not for Darren. For me. I dove in head first. Built out a diagnostic tool for vendor comparison. Helped them renegotiate 3 bloated contracts. Identified a low-grade fraud risk in one of their freight partners that saved them close to $70,000. Raphael was thrilled. He told me, if you ever want to come on full-time, the door's open. But I wasn't done yet. One day, during a systems audit, I came across something interesting. It was buried in a shared folder, a proposal from Darren, a pitch for a new client acquisition model. He'd labeled it Preliminary Q3 Strategy. It wasn't terrible, a bit ambitious. A lot of style, not enough substance. But what caught my eye was the financial projection slide. I'd seen it before. Not just the format, the actual numbers. Word for word. I pulled up an old file from my mentorship deck. One I'd shared in a guest lecture last year at a local college. Slide 6. Same phrasing. Same growth trajectory chart. Even the footnotes matched, down to the typo in forecasted. He'd copied me. Not just the idea, the work. And that's when everything clicked. Darren wasn't trying to fix things. He was trying to rebuild his image using my blueprints. Quietly, subtly, borrowing pieces of my ideas and repackaging them as his own, probably thinking I'd never notice. And I might not have, if I hadn't gotten into that powerful position. I sat back in my chair, staring at the proposal. There it was again. That old, familiar impulse, to confront, to call him out, to demand an apology. But this time, I didn't feel the need. I didn't need Darren to admit anything. I just needed to decide what kind of revenge I wanted. The satisfying kind. The strategic kind. The kind that wasn't loud, but permanent. Because now I had all the tools. I had access, influence, a direct line to the people who controlled Darren's career. And unlike Darren, I knew exactly how to use power without anyone noticing until it was too late. I didn't act right away. That's the thing people misunderstand about revenge. The most satisfying kind isn't impulsive. It's not a door slammed in someone's face or a shouting match in the rain. It's not revenge when it feels cathartic. It's revenge when it's strategic, quiet, permanent. I gave myself a few days to think, to simmer without boiling. I went about my work as if nothing had changed, answering emails, attending Zoom calls, offering polite suggestions in Slack channels, all while carrying the weight of Darren's little theft in the back of my mind like a gift-wrapped grenade. He didn't know I'd seen it. He had no idea I was working for the same company, let alone that I had access to the very system where he'd uploaded the stolen slide deck. I was operating behind the curtain now, and he was still performing center stage, oblivious to the fact that the spotlight was on a trap door. First, I documented everything. I downloaded the proposal and my original mentorship deck. I highlighted every matching sentence, every identical number, every chart that had been lifted without modification. I even screenshotted the typo, forecasted, and cross-referenced the timestamp on my original file, which was safely backed up on Google Drive, dated 7 months earlier. Then, I drafted a short internal report and titled it, Potential IP Misuse in Strategic Planning Material for Discretionary Review. I didn't send it right away. I wasn't ready yet. Instead, I waited for the perfect opportunity, the kind Darren used to live for. High stakes, lots of eyes, no room for failure. And wouldn't you know it, that opportunity came 2 weeks later. Raphael, my direct contact, looped me into a major quarterly planning session. The leadership team was finalizing pitches for a new investor partnership, a big one. Multi-year logistics overhaul, full system integration, with Darren's team responsible for drafting the client acquisition and growth strategy portion of the proposal. It was going to be presented to the board, the investors, and the regional stakeholders. In person, they booked a retreat-style offsite at a boutique venue north of the city, the kind of place with reclaimed wood walls, endless coffee refills, and whiteboards taller than most employees. Raphael asked if I could attend and give a quick 10-minute analysis of risk indicators in vendor sourcing. I said I'd be honored. The day of the offsite, I wore a charcoal button-down, clean slacks, no tie. Understated, professional, not flashy. I looked like someone you wouldn't remember, which is exactly how I wanted it. Darren was already there when I arrived, standing near the barista station, charming a small crowd with one of his trademark grand stories. I kept my distance. He hadn't seen me yet. I didn't even think he knew my name was on the attendee list. The presentations began. A few executives spoke. Raphael gave his welcome remarks and gestured toward me with a casual. And of course, Sean Wexler is here as a consulting analyst. He'll be weighing in on the procurement models after the strategic growth pitch. Darren froze. I didn't even look at him. Just nodded politely to the room and resumed reviewing the notes on my tablet. When it was his turn, he stepped up to the front confidently, even if his face had lost a bit of color. Today I want to walk you through a bold new client acquisition strategy, he began, tapping the first slide of his presentation. Something we're calling the compound growth matrix, designed to scale onboarding while maintaining lean overhead. I could almost hear the gears in his head stuttering. He'd planned for this pitch to be his big moment, his redemption arc. He'd probably practiced it in front of a mirror. But now I was in the room, and he didn't know what I was going to do. Slide after slide, he moved through the proposal. He had charisma. I'll give him that. He knew how to spin jargon into something that sounded profound, even if it lacked substance. A few heads nodded. Raphael was watching closely, arms folded. Then came slide 6. The chart. The forecast. The exact duplicate of my mentorship deck. And I raised my hand. Quick question, I said calmly. Would you mind going back one slide? Darren hesitated, then flipped it back. I stood. My voice was quiet, even. I wasn't angry. I was surgical. I've seen this chart before. In fact, I created it. The room went still. I tapped my tablet and brought up my own slide, the original version, with the same forecast and the same typo. I presented this to a group of high school seniors last year during a career mentorship event. It was uploaded to my Google Drive on March 14th at 7:32 p.m. The typo in forecasted is mine, and it appears here, in this proposal. Darren's face turned pale. He opened his mouth, but I kept going. I've cross-referenced the data. It's a direct lift. Word for word. Even the footnotes match. I have both documents ready to submit to the review committee for an internal IP audit. Raphael looked between the two slides. So did the others. A couple of them began whispering. I sat down slowly. The silence in the room was volcanic. Darren tried to recover. I must have used a reference file and forgot to update the credits. Total oversight. No credits were included. I replied without looking at him. The metadata shows you created the file last month. You'd have to explain how you accessed my deck. It was never public. Now Raphael spoke. His voice was steel. Darren, did you use Sean's proprietary content without permission? Darren's mouth opened and closed like a puppet with cut strings. I didn't. I mean, maybe I used a template from a shared folder or... Raphael raised his hand. Enough. We'll take this offline. Let's break for lunch. The room emptied faster than I'd ever seen a group of executives move. No one wanted to be associated with what was unraveling. I stayed seated. Raphael walked over quietly, sat next to me. Thank you, he said. You handled that professionally. I wanted it to be clear, I replied. No drama. Just truth. He nodded, then added, this isn't the first time I've had a feeling something was off. But this seals it. He stood and left. I didn't see Darren for the rest of the retreat. Rumor had it he left early, citing a family emergency. By the end of the week, he was gone. Not just from the team, from the company. Raphael never gave me the details, and I didn't ask. But a few weeks later, I was offered a permanent role, head of strategic logistics planning. I turned it down. I didn't need the title. I didn't need to stay. My revenge wasn't about climbing over Darren. It was about walking away while he was still scrambling for the ladder. I'd exposed him quietly, truthfully, completely. There were no raised voices, no accusations, just undeniable facts, calmly delivered in a room where it mattered most. And now, Darren was the one carrying the scarlet letter, not me. Fallout wasn't a lightning strike. It was a slow collapse, quiet, calculated, and irreversible. I didn't hear from Darren for nearly 2 months after the retreat. No texts, no calls, not even a half-hearted, you misunderstood message like he used to send when he felt the world slipping from his grip. I figured he was laying low, probably licking his wounds and trying to rebrand the whole incident as another miscommunication. That was always his move, rewrite the past faster than anyone could confirm it. But the thing about falling from a height you were never meant to reach, it leaves you with nowhere to land. I found out through a mutual acquaintance, someone who used to work on the same floor at the startup, that Darren hadn't just been fired. He'd been blacklisted. Quietly, sure. But word had spread. The investor who'd attended that offsite pulled their interest from the company altogether, citing internal integrity concerns. A full audit was launched, and though the report was sealed, it didn't take long for Darren's name to become shorthand in the company Slack for what not to do. Apparently, he'd tried applying to another logistics firm 3 weeks later, one Raphael had ties to. He didn't even get a second interview. The funny thing is, I didn't feel triumphant. Not in the way I thought I would. There was no slow-motion victory lap, no champagne cork popping in the background. Just peace. I was finally free of him. But the real fallout came when Mom called. It was a rainy Thursday afternoon. I remember because I was organizing the last of the books in Uncle Mike's library, the final piece in a project that had taken me the better part of a year. I had just placed a copy of Dune on the top shelf when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. Mom, incoming call. I let it ring twice before answering. Hello. Her voice cracked immediately. Sean. It was a whisper, The kind you only hear when someone's already lost the argument they haven't started yet. Hi, Mom. I talked to Darren. Silence. He told me what happened. Or his version of it. She sniffled. Said you embarrassed him. Destroyed his reputation. Cost him his job. I didn't respond. He sounded broken, she added, as if that was somehow my doing. Like someone who doesn't know what to do next. I waited. But then, she said slowly, I talked to Raphael. That made me pause. I called the company, she admitted. Used his name, asked to speak to someone. I needed to know if it was true. I needed to hear it from someone who wasn't you or Darren. And I asked. And he confirmed everything. Said you handled it professionally. That you were calm. Respectful. That Darren had stolen your work and tried to pass it off as his. I said nothing. I'm sorry, she whispered. Those 2 words landed harder than any insult ever had. For what? For not believing you. For blaming you. For being so blind. Her voice broke again. I thought I was protecting him, but all I did was enable him. I let him lie and lie, and every time you told the truth, I made you feel like the villain. A long pause. You were never the problem, Sean. He was. He still is. I felt something heavy loosen in my chest. Not quite forgiveness, but release. I appreciate you saying that, I replied. We talked a little longer. About the house. About Ava. About work. She didn't ask to come visit, and I didn't offer. The gap between us was still there, but for the first time in my life, she saw it too. And that was enough. A few days later, I got a letter. A real one. Handwritten. Sloppy penmanship on a folded piece of lined notebook paper. The kind you'd expect from a teenager grounded for lying about curfew. Not from a 30-something man who had once tried to destroy your life. Sean, I messed up. Worse than ever before. I know you don't owe me anything, not even the time to read this. But I wanted to say it clearly. I'm sorry. Not the half sorry I've given you in the past. Not the kind that tries to make excuses. Just sorry. I was jealous of you for years. Still am, probably. You've always been the better brother. Smarter. Kinder. More disciplined. I hated you for it, because deep down, I knew I couldn't compete. So I tore you down instead. You didn't deserve that. You never did. I've been trying to fix things, but every door feels shut now. I get why you won't answer. I get why you didn't warn me at the retreat. I wouldn't have, either. I don't expect you to forgive me. But I wanted to write this before I disappear for a while. I'm moving, don't know where yet. Just away. Gonna try to rebuild. Actually rebuild. Maybe that starts with telling the truth for once. Take care of the house. You deserve it. You always did. Darren. I read the letter once, then again. And then I put it in the back of a drawer in the library. Not out of spite, just as a reminder that the past doesn't vanish. It stays with us. But it doesn't have to define us. The next time I saw my parents was 3 weeks later, at a quiet dinner Ava and I hosted at the house. Mom brought dessert. Dad brought a bottle of red wine, the good kind. There were no speeches, no apologies, no dramatic confrontations. Just quiet laughter. Small talk. A new kind of stillness. They hadn't changed overnight. But they were trying. And this time, I wasn't trying to earn their approval. I wasn't performing for scraps of affection. I was just me. When they left, Ava and I stood by the front door, watching their taillights disappear into the distance. She looked up at me and asked, "You okay?" I smiled. "Yeah, I really am." Later that night, I walked into the library and stood in the doorway. Books neatly shelved. Desk organized. Hardwood floors clean and polished. The room was finally finished. But more than that, I'd lost a brother. But I'd gained something else. A life that no longer made space for people who only knew how to take. And as I turned off the light, the house finally felt quiet in the way I'd always hoped it would. Not empty. At peace. My name's Ryan. I'm 23, and last month was supposed to be the proudest day of my life. I was the first in my family to graduate college, something I had worked for with every ounce of my strength. Late nights, part-time jobs, and student loans that sat on my shoulders like a mountain. I thought that finally, when I walked across that stage, my family would be there to cheer me on. But instead, as I adjusted the cap on my head that morning and looked into the crowd, all I saw were strangers' faces. Not a single one of my family members had shown up. It wasn't like they didn't know. For weeks, I reminded them. I texted the group chat. I even printed out the invitation and stuck it on the fridge. But 2 days before the ceremony, my mom casually mentioned, "We've all been planning a beach trip for the weekend. It's the only time everyone's free. You'll understand, right? Besides, you'll have plenty of graduations in the future. I remember staring at her, trying to process what she had just said. Plenty of graduations? Did she think I was planning to collect them like trading cards? This was the milestone, the one I had been pushing myself toward for 4 long years. I tried to argue. I told her how important it was to me, how much I had sacrificed to get here. She just sighed and said, "Don't be selfish, Ryan. We never get to do things as a family anymore. Don't ruin it." And that was that. My dad shrugged in agreement. My sister said something about needing the trip to unwind, and my younger brother laughed, saying, "It's just sitting in a chair for an hour. Who cares?" They all brushed it off as though it was nothing. But to me, it was everything. So, when the day came, I stood in line with my classmates, adjusting my tassel and trying to ignore the ache in my chest. I clapped when my friends' families cheered from the stands, but each time the applause erupted, it was like a reminder of who wasn't there for me. I told myself to keep my head high, that I didn't need them. But when I stepped onto that stage, the silence where their voices should have been hit harder than I expected. And then, something happened. As I shook the dean's hand, he slipped a thick envelope into mine, leaned in close, and whispered, "This will change your life." My heart stopped. I glanced down at the envelope, then back up at him, but he only gave me a small smile before moving on to the next graduate. I couldn't open it right away, not while standing in front of hundreds of people, but my mind spun with questions. Was it a scholarship? A job offer? Some kind of award? All I knew was that my chest felt lighter for the first time all day, like someone had finally noticed me when my own family hadn't. That night, when I finally sat alone in my room with the envelope still in my hand, my phone started buzzing nonstop. Call after call, the screen lit up with mom, dad, sis, even my brother who barely texted me unless he wanted something. By the time I counted, it was 67 missed calls back to back. Something had shifted, and I hadn't even opened the envelope yet. And that's when I realized they must have found out. But found out what? I slid my finger under the flap, my heart pounding in my chest, and right as I was about to pull out the letter, my phone lit up again. Another call from mom. This time with a message attached. "We need to talk. Right now." I stared at the phone, the envelope still unopened in my lap, wondering why suddenly my family, who couldn't even bother to show up for me, was now desperate to reach me. That was the moment I knew something was coming, and it wasn't going to be good. I didn't answer the calls at first. After all, where was this sudden concern when I was begging them to attend my graduation? Where was this urgency when I was drowning in essays, exams, and rent payments? I let the phone buzz on my desk, almost spitefully, until the vibration stopped. When I finally tore open the envelope, my hands shook. Inside was a letter on thick paper embossed with the university seal and a check. Not just any check. A scholarship award for postgraduate studies abroad, fully funded, along with a personal letter from the dean recognizing me for being one of the top graduates in my department. My chest tightened as I read the words over and over. Distinguished for perseverance, excellence, and leadership. Me. Recognized. Valued. I sat there in disbelief. I'd never been called distinguished in my own home. At home, I was the quiet one, the serious one, or sometimes the selfish one if I dared to say no to anyone. But here was proof that my sacrifices, all those nights of exhaustion and doubt, had actually meant something. Not 5 minutes later, my mom's text came through. "We heard about the envelope. Why didn't you tell us sooner?" It stopped me cold. I hadn't told them because I didn't even know this was coming. The ceremony had barely ended, and already they knew. I didn't respond. Instead, I just sat with the letter, holding it like a shield. By the next morning, things escalated. My sister was the first to show up at my apartment. She didn't even knock politely. She banged on the door until I opened it, still in my pajamas. "You should have called us the second you got that," she said, brushing past me into the living room. She picked up the letter from the coffee table like it belonged to her. "Do you even realize what this means for all of us?" "All of us," I repeated, stunned. "It's my award, not yours." She gave me a look like I was being ridiculous. "You know how much mom and dad have sacrificed for you? The least you could do is use this opportunity to give back. Imagine the vacations we could take if you're earning big abroad. And don't forget, you'll need to send money home. That's what good kids do." I felt my jaw tighten. Vacations. That was the first thing she thought of. Not the years I spent struggling. Not the recognition of my hard work. No, Her mind went straight to palm trees and cocktails. Before I could answer, my mom called again. This time I picked up, just to hear her voice. "Ryan," she started sweetly, "we're so proud of you. We knew you had it in you." Her voice was syrupy, the kind she used when she wanted something. "But you need to understand, you wouldn't have gotten this far without us. Don't forget who supported you all these years." I nearly laughed out loud. Supported me? They skipped my graduation to go lie on a beach. They never helped with tuition or even rent. The closest thing to support I got was being told not to complain about being tired. "Mom," I said carefully, "I paid my own way through school. You didn't cover a single bill." Her tone sharpened instantly. "Don't you dare talk to me like that. You think you're better than us now, just because of some fancy letter? You're still our son, and family comes first. Remember that. Family comes first." The phrase stung. Family first, except when it came to me. When my sister needed help paying for a new car, everyone pitched in. When my brother got into trouble at school, the whole family rearranged their schedules to attend his meetings. When it was me, silence. I had learned early that if I wanted anything, grades, money, stability, I had to fight for it myself. And yet, here they were, suddenly claiming ownership over my success. The following days blurred together into a strange mix of fake congratulations and subtle demands. My dad called to remind me how much the family name mattered, hinting that I'd better make them look good when I went abroad. My sister texted me links to luxury apartments in Europe, saying, "Pick one with a spare room so we can visit." My younger brother casually asked if I could help him get a car upgrade once I was settled, as if I was some sort of ATM. Each request chipped away at me, but the breaking point came a week later when I went home for dinner, trying to give them one last chance. The table was set, everyone smiling like nothing was wrong. But the moment I sat down, Mom launched into her speech. "We've all agreed that you should set up a family fund once you're abroad. It'll be easier for you than for us. A small percentage of your income every month. We'll decide how it's used." I froze, fork halfway to my mouth. "You've all agreed?" "Without me." Dad cleared his throat. "Ryan, don't be difficult. We sacrificed plenty. This is your chance to repay us." The food turned to dust in my mouth. I looked around the table, my sister grinning smugly, my brother nodding like it was already settled, my parents staring at me expectantly. And in that moment, it became painfully clear. They didn't see me as Ryan, their son. They saw me as a resource. A golden goose. I put my fork down slowly, trying to control the storm brewing inside me. "I haven't even left yet. And already you're making plans for my money." Mom's smile slipped. "Don't make it sound ugly. It's family. Family takes care of each other." The words hung in the air, bitter and heavy. Family takes care of each other, except when it's me who needs it. I excused myself from the table, my chest tight with rage and disbelief. I knew then that the dynamic had shifted forever. They weren't going to let this go. They were going to squeeze me until I broke. Unless I did something first. And that night, lying awake staring at the ceiling, I started to realize I had something they desperately wanted. And that meant, for the first time, the power was mine. A few days after that dinner, I tried to convince myself maybe I was overreacting. Maybe they were just excited, and maybe once things settled, they'd stop treating me like some walking checkbook. But then came the moment that shattered any illusion I had left. It was a Friday afternoon when I got home from class. I had started prepping documents for the postgraduate scholarship, passport renewal, medical forms, the works. I kept everything neatly stacked on my desk in a folder because I didn't want to risk losing anything. That day, though, the folder wasn't where I had left it. My stomach dropped. I tore through my room, checking every drawer, the closet, even under my bed. Gone. Panic gnawed at me. Those papers weren't just paperwork. They were my ticket to the future I had fought for. Without them, I couldn't even begin the process of moving abroad. My heart raced as I grabbed my phone and called my mom. She answered on the second ring, her voice calm, almost too calm. "Oh, that folder? We picked it up this morning," she said like it was the most natural thing in the world. My chest tightened. "You what? Why would you take it without telling me? We're just making sure everything's handled properly. You're young, Ryan. You don't always think things through. Your father and I will look it over and decide what's best for you. Don't worry." I was speechless. Decide what's best for me. It was my scholarship, my opportunity, my life. Yet in her voice, I heard no recognition of that. Only authority, as though I was still a child asking for permission to go out. "Mom, you need to bring those back. Right now." My voice shook, half from anger, half from fear. She sighed heavily, like I was being unreasonable. "Ryan, don't be dramatic. We've already spoken to your aunt about this. She thinks it would be smarter if you stayed here and worked locally for a few years first. You could contribute more to the family that way." My knees nearly buckled. They hadn't just taken my documents. They were planning to sabotage my chance to leave. The envelope had been addressed to me. The award was in my name. And yet they were already making phone calls to figure out how to keep me tethered. I hung up without another word and drove straight to my parents' house. When I stormed inside, my sister was sitting on the couch flipping through my folder. She didn't even look guilty. She grinned. "You should thank us. We're protecting you from making a selfish decision." "A selfish decision?" I repeated, my voice rising. "This is the biggest opportunity of my life." Dad came into the room then, holding the letter from the dean like it belonged to him. "Ryan, sit down. We need to be realistic. Your place is here, with us. You can always apply for something else later. But right now, the family needs you." I stood frozen, my pulse pounding in my ears. They weren't just being manipulative. They were trying to strip me of my future. Every ounce of trust one had left in them evaporated in that moment. "You're not keeping these," I said finally, stepping toward my sister and snatching the folder out of her hands. She gasped, as though I had wronged her. Mom shot up from the armchair, her voice sharp. "Ryan, if you walk out that door with those papers, don't bother coming back. Do you hear me? You'll regret turning your back on your family." Her words cut deep, but something inside me had already shifted. For years I had bent over backward, stayed quiet, let them belittle or overlook me. But not anymore. This was my line in the sand. I clutched the folder against my chest and walked out, their voices trailing behind me. Accusations, guilt trips, desperate threats. My father even shouted, "You're making the biggest mistake of your life." But the truth was, they had made theirs. That night, as I sat in my apartment, folder still in my hands, I realized the betrayal was deeper than just stealing papers. It was the cold, deliberate message behind it, that my future didn't belong to me. That to them, I wasn't a person with dreams. I was an asset to control. And it was in that moment, heartbroken but strangely clear-headed, that I understood something. If they could betray me like this once, they'd do it again. Unless I found a way to turn the tables. For the next week, I felt like a ghost moving through my own life. I went to class, smiled politely at my professors, even met with a few friends for coffee, but inside, everything was numb. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my sister smirking with my folder in her hands, my father's stern look as he told me, "Your place is here," and my mother's words echoing like a curse. "If you walk out that door with those papers, don't bother coming back." I told myself I had done the right thing by taking back my documents, but the fallout hit me harder than I expected. My phone didn't stop buzzing. Texts, calls, voicemails, all filled with the same mixture of guilt trips and anger. "We just want what's best for you. Stop being ungrateful. Do you even care about us? You're abandoning your family for strangers." It was relentless. And the worst part? A piece of me still wanted their approval. Still wanted to hear my parents say they were proud without conditions attached. But deep down, I knew that was never coming. One evening, I made the mistake of scrolling through social media. There they were, my family on that beach trip, laughing, arms linked, drinks in their hands. The caption from my sister read, "Family first, always." The hypocrisy hit me like a punch in the gut. They couldn't spare a single afternoon for my graduation, but they had the energy to plaster their smiles online and brag about their closeness. And now, they had the nerve to demand I give up my chance at independence for the sake of family. I stopped sleeping well. At night, I lay awake, replaying years of moments I had brushed off but now saw clearly. The time my parents scraped together money to help my sister buy a used car, while telling me they couldn't lend me a dime for textbooks. The way my younger brother always got second chances, no matter how badly he messed up, while I was expected to be the responsible one. The way they told me to stop making a scene, when I cried quietly at the dinner table after working 2 jobs and still falling behind on rent. It wasn't just about graduation or the envelope. It was a pattern, and for the first time, I couldn't ignore it. The loneliness that followed was suffocating. My friends celebrated their graduations with parties, dinners, family photos plastered across their walls. I sat in my tiny apartment, folder clutched like a lifeline, staring at the scholarship letter over and over just to remind myself I wasn't crazy. My success was real, even if no one at home acknowledged it. But as much as the pain threatened to swallow me, a quiet determination began to grow underneath it. If my family was going to see me as nothing more than a resource, then maybe the only way forward was to stop giving them access to me. I didn't announce it. I didn't fight them anymore. I just started to pull away. I stopped answering calls, stopped responding to texts. I blocked my sister after she sent me a furious message about how selfish I was being, complete with screenshots of her research on how much I could supposedly earn abroad. My parents started sending emails instead, long paragraphs about loyalty and duty, but I stopped opening those too. Instead, I threw myself into preparation. I met with the scholarship coordinator in secret, gathering every detail about my move abroad. I quietly renewed my passport, booked appointments, filled out forms. I even started saving what little money I had left after bills, keeping it tucked away in a separate account. It wasn't much, but it was mine, and no one could touch it. Still, the weight of silence pressed on me. Each time I ignored another message, I felt both relief and guilt. Relief that I was finally breaking free, and guilt that I was abandoning the people who had raised me, no matter how flawed. That inner tug-of-war nearly broke me more than once. There were nights I sat at my desk with the phone in my hand, hovering over the call button, tempted to beg for even a scrap of genuine support. But then I'd picture the folder in my sister's hands, my father's voice telling me, "Your place is here," and the temptation would burn away. The real breaking point of this stage came one night when I got home to find an envelope slipped under my door. It was from my parents. Inside was a handwritten letter. At first, I thought, maybe, finally, an apology. But no, the words were a dagger cloaked in politeness. "Ryan, we love you, but we cannot support these reckless choices. You owe it to us to stay close, to contribute to the family. Do not go through with this scholarship. It will destroy what little bond we have left. If you insist on going, you are no longer welcome in our home." I read it 3 times. The last line burned into my eyes. "You are no longer welcome in our home." I sat there in the dim light of my apartment, my chest hollow, realizing that the family I had spent my whole life trying to please had just written me out of their lives like it was nothing. That night, I hit rock bottom. But as I sat there, broken but breathing, one thought cut through the fog. They had taken so much from me already. They weren't going to take this too. And in that darkness, a quiet plan began to form. The letter from my parents sat on my desk for days, like a stone I couldn't move. Every time I glanced at it, the words, "You are no longer welcome in our home," flared in my chest. For a while, I carried that pain like it was carved into me, but something started to shift. The more I read their words, the more I realized they weren't a verdict, they were a release. If I was no longer welcome, then maybe I no longer had to bend myself into knots to earn their approval. Maybe I could finally live for myself. It began with small steps. I woke up one morning and, instead of checking my phone for their calls or texts, I left it on silent and went for a run. The air felt sharper, cleaner, as if I was inhaling a life that hadn't belonged to me before. I came back, sweaty and exhausted, but for once I didn't feel weighed down. I felt lighter, free. From there, I doubled down on preparation for my scholarship. I met with the program advisor more frequently, absorbing every detail about life abroad, the language, the city, the research I'd be diving into. She looked at me with genuine pride in her eyes and said, "Ryan, you're exactly the kind of student this award was meant for." I nearly broke down right there in her office. To hear someone say those words without an agenda, without an ulterior motive, it felt like oxygen after years of suffocating. I also began working more hours at my part-time job, saving every extra cent. I cut back on little luxuries, no takeout, no late-night impulse buys, because I wanted to step onto that plane with a safety net of my own. Each paycheck I deposited into that quiet little savings account felt like stacking bricks under my feet, lifting me higher, giving me ground that no one could pull out from under me. Something else started happening too. People around me noticed. My professors reached out with glowing recommendation letters. A mentor offered me a research assistant position over the summer, saying he trusted me more than anyone else to handle it. Even some of my friends, who had celebrated with their families at graduation, admitted they admired how I kept going despite everything. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was being seen. But the most transformative moment came when I walked into my dean's office for a follow-up meeting. He handed me another envelope, thinner this time, and said, "Ryan, we've secured you a small stipend to help with the transition abroad. It's not much, but we believe in you. Don't waste this chance." I walked out of that office with tears burning my eyes. The very thing my family had tried to strip from me, my independence, my chance at a future, was now being reinforced by people who owed me nothing but still chose to invest in me. As the weeks passed, the fog of despair began to clear. I wasn't Ryan the overlooked son anymore. I was Ryan the scholarship recipient, the future researcher, the one who had fought and won. The weight of my family's betrayal didn't vanish, but it no longer controlled me. Instead, it fueled me. Every reminder of their neglect became a reason to push harder, to succeed further, to prove, to myself, not to them, that I was more than the role they had caged me in. I began to imagine my life abroad not as an escape, but as a rebirth. A city where no one knew me as the background character in someone else's story. A place where I could step forward without hearing, "Don't be selfish," every time I chose my own path. The vision of that future became my anchor. Still, in the back of my mind, I knew the storm wasn't over. My family hadn't given up. They wouldn't. The silence from them in those weeks felt less like surrender and more like the quiet before something bigger. And I could sense it. They were planning something. But this time, I wasn't the same Ryan they thought they could control. I was stronger. And when their next move came, I would be ready. The weeks leading up to my departure were some of the strangest of my life. Outwardly, I was focused, working, saving, filling out forms, getting everything in order. Inwardly, I was carrying a storm. The betrayal still burned in me, but it had started to take a different shape. Not raw pain anymore, more like a sharpened edge. I wasn't just surviving their mistreatment anymore. I was starting to think about what it would mean to turn the tables. The setup came quietly, almost by accident. One evening, I stayed late in the scholarship office going over final paperwork. The coordinator, a woman named Dr. Patel who had been nothing but kind to me, leaned in as we finished and said, "By the way, Ryan, part of your award includes a press release. The university wants to highlight your story. It's rare we get students who come from such adversity and still achieve so much. The local paper will be running a feature." My breath caught. A press release. A feature. Suddenly, I realized why my family had been so desperate to keep me from leaving. They already knew about this. They hadn't stumbled on my envelope by accident. They had probably heard whispers from someone connected to the school, and the idea of my name in the paper without their fingerprints all over it had driven them mad. That night, when I got home, I thought about how my family presented themselves to the world. I thought about my sister's social media posts flaunting "family first," about my dad's obsession with the family name, about my mom's constant reminders that "we sacrificed for you." They thrived on appearances, on controlling the story. And now, for the first time, the story wasn't theirs, it was mine. That realization flipped a switch in me. I didn't just have an opportunity abroad. I had a platform. People were going to hear my name, read my story, maybe even know about the struggles I had endured. And I realized I had the power to decide exactly how that story was told. I started meeting quietly with the PR representative from the university. She asked me for quotes, anecdotes, pieces of my journey they could use in the article. I told her about working nights, about scraping together money for tuition, about the loneliness of pursuing a dream without support. I didn't mention my family by name, but I didn't need to. The truth spoke loudly enough. When the draft came back, it described me as a student who rose from financial hardship and lack of family support to achieve one of the university's highest honors. I read that line over and over, my chest both aching and soaring. For once, the narrative was real, not twisted. At the same time, I started to prepare my finances more carefully. I opened a second bank account under my own name at a different institution, one my family didn't even know I had. Into that account, I funneled every extra dollar from work, every stipend check, every cent I could squirrel away. It wasn't much yet, but it was untouchable. And more than that, it was proof that I was building something outside of their reach. Then came the unexpected card in my hand. A distant relative, my Uncle Martin, reached out after hearing about my award. Unlike the rest of my family, he'd always kept a little distance from the drama. He invited me to lunch, and over sandwiches in a quiet cafe, he said, "Ryan, I've always admired your independence. Don't let them clip your wings. If you ever need help getting settled abroad, I have connections. People who would be glad to support you." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Here was someone who barely knew me, offering more encouragement in a single lunch than my immediate family had given me in years. I thanked him, but I also tucked his words away like a key. Connections. Support. An ally where I least expected one. Piece by piece, the setup for revenge was forming without me even forcing it. A press release that would tell the truth. Finances hidden away. A new network of allies outside my family's control. And beneath it all, the steady drum of determination. If they had wanted to own my success, I was going to make sure they had no part of it. But then, just when I thought I was ahead of them, I received a text from my sister late one night. "We know about the article. Don't you dare embarrass us." That was when I knew the real fight hadn't even started yet. The morning the article was published, I bought 2 copies of the local paper. One for myself, and one I kept folded neatly, untouched. A keepsake. Maybe, or maybe ammunition. The headline ran across the community section. Local graduate awarded prestigious scholarship abroad. A journey of perseverance. Beneath it was a photo of me in my cap and gown, smiling nervously at the camera, and the story of how I had worked 2 jobs, supported myself through school, and earned recognition despite, as the article put it, little direct family support. I didn't embellish. I didn't name names. But I didn't hide the truth, either. And the truth, written in black and white for the whole community to see, hit my family like a wrecking ball. By noon, my phone lit up with calls. First from my mother, then my father, then my sister, who sent a barrage of messages. "How dare you? You made us look like monsters. Delete it or make them print a correction." She didn't seem to understand how newspapers worked, and that made it all the more satisfying. I didn't reply. I sat at my desk, sipping coffee, rereading the article, letting the silence of my phone grow heavier with every unanswered ring. The fallout came quickly. That evening, my mom showed up at my apartment, knocking hard enough that my neighbors peeked through their blinds. When I finally opened the door, she shoved the paper into my chest. "Do you realize what you've done?" she hissed. I told the truth, I said calmly. My voice was steady in a way it had never been around her before. Her eyes flashed. "You made us look like we abandoned you. Do you know how humiliating this is? People are asking questions. Your aunt called me crying. Everyone thinks we're awful parents." I met her gaze and didn't flinch. "If the truth makes you look bad, that's not my fault." She stared at me, stunned, as though the words had come from a stranger. For years, I'd been the quiet one, the obedient one. This was the first time I'd spoken back without apology. That night, I posted the article on my own social media with a short caption, grateful for the recognition and for everyone who believed in me along the way. I didn't tag my family. I didn't need to. The comments poured in from friends, professors, even distant acquaintances who said things like, "So proud of you, Ryan," and "Incredible achievement. You earned every bit of it." The silence from my family's accounts was deafening. But the real revenge came later, in a way I hadn't even planned. A week after the article ran, the university held a small reception for scholarship recipients. Donors, faculty, and local press were invited. I arrived in a simple suit, nervous but proud, and spent the evening shaking hands with people who told me I had a bright future. Among them was a local business leader who casually mentioned, "Your story really struck a chord. If you're ever back in town after your studies, look me up. We're always looking for people with drive." Opportunities. Doors opening. My family, meanwhile, could only watch from the outside. They weren't invited, they weren't celebrated, and they couldn't claim a shred of the spotlight they had tried to wrestle away from me. A few days later, my sister sent me one last message. "Fine. Do whatever you want. Just don't come crawling back when it falls apart." I looked at the text for a long moment, then closed my phone without replying. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to argue, or explain, or plead. The revenge wasn't loud or dramatic. It was in the calm, undeniable fact that I had risen without them, that the world was finally seeing me for who I was, not who they wanted me to be. And as I began to pack my bags for the move abroad, folding each shirt with a kind of quiet ceremony, I realized I wasn't running away anymore. I was stepping forward. and they were the ones left behind. But just when I thought the storm had passed, one final twist landed at my door. One that would test just how far they were willing to go to claw back control. The final twist came 3 days before my flight. I came home from work to find an official-looking envelope slipped under my door. At first, my heart raced. I thought maybe it was last-minute scholarship paperwork. But when I tore it open, I froze. Inside was a letter from a local attorney. My parents had tried to file a claim that, since they had supported me financially during my studies, they were entitled to a portion of the stipend I would be receiving abroad. It was laughable on its face. They hadn't given me a cent, but seeing it written on legal letterhead made my chest tighten. It wasn't enough for them to guilt me or sabotage me. They were trying to legally bind me to them, to stake a claim in my success as though I were property. The next morning, I marched straight to the university's legal aid office, folder in hand. When I showed the lawyer the letter, she read it once, smirked, and said, "They don't have a case. If they want to embarrass themselves in court, let them. We'll make sure you're protected." And that was it. With one stroke of her pen, the threat was neutralized. But the humiliation for my parents? That lingered. Because when word spread, when family friends, church acquaintances, and neighbors heard they had tried to sue their own son for money he earned, the shame landed squarely on their shoulders. My mom called me, sobbing, begging me to retract the story if anyone asked. My dad left me a voicemail I'll never forget. "You've ruined this family's name." "No," I thought as I deleted it. "You ruined it yourselves." On the day of my departure, I stood at the airport with a single suitcase, the scholarship check tucked safely in my carry-on. I didn't expect anyone to see me off, and no one did. My friends texted me good luck, professors emailed warm farewells, but from my family? Silence. As I boarded the plane, I felt a mix of sadness and exhilaration. Sadness because some part of me still wished they could have been the kind of family to cheer me on. Exhilaration because I had finally broken free. Months later, while adjusting to my new life abroad, I got an email from my Uncle Martin. He'd run into my parents at a community event, and apparently, the gossip about their failed legal stunt was still fresh. They'd become pariahs in circles where family reputation used to be their prized possession. My sister had deleted her family-first posts, my father barely showed his face at church, and my mother, once so vocal, had gone quiet. Their desperate grab for control had backfired, leaving them exposed. I closed my laptop that night and looked out over the city skyline. Thousands of miles away, their voices could no longer touch me. My life was finally my own. And as I turned back to my desk, scholarship books open, plans laid out for a future they could never dictate, I realized something with absolute clarity. They had tried to make me believe I owed them everything. But in the end, the only thing I owed them was distance. That was the last time I ever looked back. I'm 28 years old, and my name's Evan. If you had told me 5 years ago that I'd one day be sitting here writing a post about my own family, I would have laughed. I always thought those stories were exaggerated, overdramatic accounts of the worst families out there. I thought, that can't really happen in real life, right? But here I am. My family has always been complicated. We're not the kind of group you see in those holiday commercials where everyone's laughing around a long table, passing mashed potatoes, smiling like they're in a Norman Rockwell painting. No, our gatherings have always been tense. Growing up, I was the responsible one. The one who studied hard, got a job straight out of college, and learned to save. Meanwhile, my cousins partied their way through their 20s, and my parents, well, let's just say responsibility wasn't their strong suit. Bills were late, utilities shut off, excuses were plentiful. And me? I got used to quietly stepping in when things fell apart. I don't think I really noticed the pattern until my mid-20s. Back then, it seemed normal. If my mom said she couldn't make the car payment, I wired her money. If the power got cut, I'd call the electric company myself, pretending it was my bill, just to keep the lights on at their house. She always called it temporary help, promised to make it up to me one day. My dad was more subtle. He'd just drop little hints about how family sticks together or how a good son doesn't let his parents struggle. At first, it felt like duty. Then it became expectation. And eventually, it felt like shackles. Thanksgiving had always been the one day I still looked forward to. Not because of the family, honestly, but because of the food. Turkey, stuffing, pies. It was the one tradition that actually made me feel like maybe, just maybe, we were normal. So when my mom called me a week before this past Thanksgiving and said, "We're not doing anything this year, honey. Times are tough, and we just can't afford it," I believed her. She sounded tired, defeated. I remember actually feeling bad for her. I even offered to chip in a little if it would help, but she shut me down immediately. "No, no. We wouldn't feel right taking more from you," she said. That stung, in a weird way. It was the first time she had ever outright refused money from me, and I thought maybe it was a sign things were changing. Maybe she realized how much she'd leaned on me all these years. Maybe she wanted to prove she could handle things on her own. I let myself believe that. So instead of heading to some family gathering, I worked late that night. My company had just landed a huge client, and there were deadlines pressing down on me. I stayed in the office until nearly midnight, ate vending machine chips for dinner, and walked home through the cold November air thinking, well, at least no one's together having fun without me. The next day, I was scrolling on Instagram during a coffee break when I saw it. A story from my cousin Ashley, her with a glass of wine, smiling, clinking glasses with my mom. Behind them, a long dining table absolutely packed with food. Turkey, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, casseroles, pies. More food than I'd seen at any Thanksgiving we'd ever had before. And it wasn't just Ashley and my mom. Every cousin, every uncle, even my dad, everyone was there. Everyone but me. I sat there staring at my phone, frozen. At first, I thought, maybe this is an old photo. But no, the caption read, "Best Thanksgiving yet. Love my family." My throat felt tight, my chest heavy. They hadn't just canceled. They had lied. To me. Specifically to me. They all gathered, they all ate, they all laughed, and I wasn't even told. I wasn't even an afterthought. I can't describe the mix of emotions I felt in that moment. Embarrassment, like I was some gullible fool. Hurt, because it wasn't just about missing turkey, it was about being excluded deliberately. Anger, a sharp edge that made my hands tremble as I held the phone. And underneath it all, a quiet realization that maybe my role in the family wasn't member at all. Maybe I was just the bank. I didn't say anything at first. I went back to work, buried myself in spreadsheets, told myself it didn't matter. But that night, lying in bed, the betrayal kept replaying in my head. My mom's voice, "We can't afford it." My cousin's video, the sparkling decorations, the giant feast. It wasn't just a dinner. It was a performance. And I wasn't even invited. The final straw came 2 days later. My phone buzzed, a text from my mom. It read, "Hey honey, we're really short this month. Could you cover $2,800 for the mortgage? We'll pay you back soon, promise." I stared at that message for a long time. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. For years, I'd always caved. Always rationalized it. Always said, "Of course, Mom." But this time, my brain didn't go to guilt. It went to that video. To the laughter, the clinking glasses, the mountain of food. And something in me snapped. I typed out my response slowly, deliberately. "Ask your guests." Then I hit send. And immediately, I blocked her. Blocked my dad. Blocked my cousins. Blocked them all. The next morning, I woke up to 41 missed calls. 41. And a single message that somehow slipped through. "Please, don't do this to us." And that was the moment I knew something had shifted. This wasn't just about one Thanksgiving anymore. It was about years of taking, lying, manipulating. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to play along. But I had no idea just how messy it was going to get. The first few hours after I hit block were oddly quiet. Almost peaceful. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring at the silence on my phone screen, half expecting it to light up again. It didn't. For the first time in years, I felt free. No guilt-trip voicemail from dad. No guilt-laced text from mom. No cousins casually mentioning how broke they were before sliding into a request. Just silence. That peace lasted maybe 12 hours. By Saturday afternoon, the calls started coming in, but not directly. I'd blocked everyone, but they weren't done with me. They tried through different numbers. Random area codes I didn't recognize. At first, I ignored them. But curiosity got the better of me on one, and when I answered, it was my Aunt Karen, my mom's sister. "Evan, sweetheart," she said in her syrupy voice. "Your mom is worried sick. Why would you block her? She was crying last night. Said she couldn't even sleep." I sat there, silent for a beat, before finally saying, "She lied to me. All of you did. You told me Thanksgiving was canceled. And then you all had a feast without me." There was this pause on the other end. just long enough to confirm she knew. Then she gave a little laugh, the kind people give when they're brushing off something ugly. "Oh, honey, don't take that personally. It wasn't like that. It just happened last minute. We didn't want to bother you. You're always so busy with work, and honestly, we figured you wouldn't want to come all the way out here anyway." I could feel my jaw tightening. "So instead of asking me, you lied?" "Honey," she said again, with a little sigh, "don't make such a big deal out of one dinner. Families keep secrets sometimes. It's not worth blowing up over. Families keep secrets." The way she said it made me feel small, like I was the one being dramatic. But I knew what I saw. This wasn't some thrown-together potluck. This was planned. The decorations, the amount of food, the number of guests, it was intentional. And the fact that they thought it was okay to lie to me specifically made it sting worse. I hung up without another word. That's when the texts started trickling in, not from my parents, but from cousins. One message from Ashley. "Hey cuz, don't be mad. It wasn't personal. But honestly, Mom and Dad said you can be a downer sometimes, and they didn't want drama. It was just easier this way. No hard feelings. No hard feelings." As if I should just shrug off being excluded like a school kid left off the playground invite list. Another text came from my cousin Ryan. "Bro, you're overreacting. You're lucky you're not tied down like the rest of us. Just chill, man." And then, the kicker, from my older brother, Chris. He rarely reached out about anything, but when he did, it was never good. His message was short: "Grow up. Mom and Dad need you. Stop being selfish." Selfish. That word bounced around my head for hours. Selfish. After years of bailing them out, after countless wires and loans and late-night calls fixing problems I didn't create. Selfish, because for once I'd said no. By Monday, things escalated. I got an email at work, not from my parents, but from my dad's personal account. The subject line, "Family First." The body of the email was a guilt trip masterpiece. "Evan, I don't know what you're trying to prove by ignoring us. We raised you, gave you everything we could, and this is how you repay us? We're drowning over here, and you're sitting on your high horse, pretending you're better than the rest of us. Family isn't about money, it's about loyalty. And right now, you're showing none. If you don't help with the mortgage, we could lose the house. Is that what you want? To see your parents homeless while you sit in your fancy apartment? Think about it." I read that email 3 times. The manipulation was so thick it nearly dripped off the screen. I didn't even know where to start. Gave me everything we could. I'd paid off half their debt before I was 25. Family isn't about money. Then why was I constantly being asked for it? And homeless? They just hosted a Thanksgiving banquet fit for 20 people. I didn't reply. Instead, I sat in my office chair, staring out the window at the city skyline. And for the first time, I wondered what my life would look like if I never spoke to them again. The problem was, my parents weren't just persistent. They were relentless. When silence didn't work, they shifted tactics. Tuesday night, my phone buzzed with a notification from Venmo. It was a request from my mom. $2,800, labeled mortgage. Just like that. No words, no explanation. Just the number and the audacity. I declined it. The next morning, another request. This time $500, labeled groceries. Declined again. By Friday, there were 5 different requests, ranging from $75 for gas to $1,200 for medical bills. I declined every one. Each time I did, the guilt loosened its grip just a little bit more. But they didn't stop. One evening, I came home to find a note slipped under my apartment door. No envelope, just a crumpled piece of paper with messy handwriting. It read, "You can ignore our calls, but you can't ignore us forever. We're family. Family means obligation. Stop being stubborn. Do the right thing." I stared at that note for a long time, my hands trembling slightly. They'd never come to my place before. They weren't supposed to know where I lived. At least, I hadn't given them the address. That realization made my stomach twist. I called my building manager the next day, asked about security cameras, and sure enough, there was footage. My brother Chris, standing in the hallway, sliding the note under my door. My own brother. That weekend, I decided to test something. I went completely radio silent. No responses, no declines, nothing. I wanted to see how far they'd go. And what I saw was illuminating. My cousin Ashley posted another story, this time at some brunch. In the background, I could hear her laughing. Evan's being dramatic. He'll cave, he always does. Mom says give it a week. They thought this was funny. They thought my boundaries were just a temporary tantrum. That was the moment it shifted for me. This wasn't just about one dinner or even years of financial pressure. This was about the role I'd been assigned in the family, the wallet, the fixer, the one they could lie to, exclude, and guilt, because at the end of the day, I'd always pay up. But this time, I wasn't going to. And when they realized that, really realized it, the real storm began. Until this point, all their tactics had been words, calls, texts, guilt trips, money requests. Annoying, manipulative, painful, yes, but still just noise. What happened next wasn't just noise. It was action, a choice, a betrayal that made everything else feel like child's play. It started on a Wednesday morning. I was sipping coffee at my desk when my phone buzzed with an email notification. At first, I thought it was more spam or one of Dad's dramatic guilt essays. But when I opened it, my blood ran cold. It wasn't from my dad. It was from my bank. The subject line read, "Unusual account activity detected." My heart dropped. I clicked it open and scanned quickly. A transfer request had been attempted the night before, $2,800, the exact amount my mom had asked for the mortgage. But the transfer hadn't come from me. It had been initiated online, using my credentials. I froze. My pulse pounded in my ears. I hadn't given them access, at least, not directly. But I remembered something from a few years back. One night, in a moment of weakness, I'd helped Mom set up her online bill pay over the phone. I'd logged in through my account to pay something quickly, then walked her through creating her own. It had been a rushed evening, and I'd stupidly reused a simple password variation. My mom was sitting beside me that night, watching as I typed. I hadn't thought anything of it. Apparently, she had. The bank flagged the transfer and froze my account temporarily until I confirmed. I spent the next 2 hours on the phone, changing passwords, verifying my identity, setting up two-factor authentication, everything I should have done years ago. But as I went through the motions, the reality settled like a stone in my stomach. My mom had tried to access my money directly. She hadn't asked this time. She hadn't begged. She had just taken. I didn't call her. I couldn't. I was shaking too much. My mind was a whirlwind of anger and disbelief. For years, I'd given willingly, even when it hurt me. And now? Now they had decided to cut out the middleman. By the evening, my phone was lighting up again with block number calls. I ignored them until one voicemail slipped through from my dad. His voice was steady, almost casual, like he was talking about weather instead of theft. "Evan, I heard you froze the account. That wasn't necessary. Your mother just tried to help keep us afloat. You know we wouldn't let you go without. We're family. Don't make this bigger than it is." I remember throwing my phone down on the couch and just staring at the ceiling. Don't make this bigger than it is. As if breaking into my account was just a small hiccup, a misunderstanding. For 2 days, I said nothing. I went about my life like a ghost, simmering in silence. I worked, I ate, I slept, barely. But inside, I was unraveling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that transfer request, that number $2,800 glowing on the screen like proof of everything I'd refused to believe. But the betrayal wasn't finished with me yet. Saturday morning, I got another knock at my door. This time, it wasn't a note. It was a delivery. A stack of envelopes in a rubber band, dropped by the mailman. My name on all of them. Inside, bills, electric, gas, internet, all with my parents' address. My address listed as the payer. I sat on the floor with those envelopes spread out in front of me, my hands trembling as I flipped through. They'd changed the billing to me. Somehow, some way, they'd started redirecting their household bills under my name. Maybe they'd convinced a customer service rep with enough information. Maybe they used details I'd given them years ago. But there it was, in black and white. Evan, last name, listed as responsible for the balance. That was the breaking point. All the years of guilt, all the whispered manipulations, all the subtle digs about how family takes care of each other, they'd finally put it in writing. They weren't asking for help anymore. They were declaring me responsible. I didn't cry, at least not right away. What I felt was more like a hollow ache. Like something inside me had cracked open, and all the hurt from the past decade was spilling out at once. I thought about every birthday I'd missed because I was working overtime to send them money. I thought about every time I'd turned down a vacation, a nicer apartment, a night out with friends, because Mom and Dad really need this month covered. I thought about how I'd convinced myself it was love, my sacrifice for family. And now? It was just theft with a smile. When the tears finally came, they weren't soft. They were hot and ugly. Anger, grief, shame, all tangled together. I sat in my apartment with those envelopes around me like evidence at a crime scene. And for the first time, I said it out loud to the empty room. They don't love me. They love what I give them. That thought echoed in my head like a drumbeat. It wasn't just one lie or one stolen dollar. It was years of a pattern I hadn't wanted to name. That night, I unblocked my mom's number, not to talk, but to see if she'd notice. She did. Within 5 minutes, the messages came through in a flood. Thank you. Honey, I knew you'd come around. We really didn't mean to upset you about Thanksgiving. It just happened last minute. You know how much we rely on you. You're the only responsible one. That last message made me sick. The only responsible one. As if that wasn't a compliment, but a burden. A label they'd slapped on me to justify every hand they'd shoved into my pocket. And then, like a cherry on top, a final text at midnight. Can you send the $2,800 by tomorrow morning? We can't keep waiting. I stared at that message for a long time, my chest burning. The audacity. After trying to hack into my bank, after rerouting bills to my name, they still thought I'd fold with the right combination of words. I typed a reply. My hands shook as I did it, not with fear this time, but with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. You crossed the line. That was all I sent. 4 words. No explanations. No excuses. No promises. The typing bubbles appeared immediately, then stopped, then appeared again. I didn't wait to see the response. I turned off my phone, set it on the nightstand, and lay awake staring at the ceiling. Because I knew this wasn't over. This wasn't them apologizing or backing down. This was them regrouping. And the next move they made. I had no idea how far they'd go. The morning after I sent that forward text, I felt strangely hollow. You'd think I would have felt strong, empowered even, standing up for myself. Instead, it felt like all the air had been sucked out of me. My apartment was too quiet. My coffee tasted bitter. The city outside my window moved on as if nothing had happened. But inside, I was cracked wide open. I went through the motions at work that week, but everyone noticed something was off. My coworker James asked me twice if I was okay, and I just mumbled something about being tired. The truth was, I wasn't sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, my brain replayed the past few weeks like a cruel slideshow. The hidden Thanksgiving feast, the bank alert, the stack of bills with my name on them. And over all of it, my dad's voice. Family means obligation. Obligation. That word gnawed at me. I started questioning everything. Was I wrong to cut them off? Was I overreacting? Maybe families really did come with built-in responsibilities. Maybe my cousins were right when they laughed it off. Maybe I really was being selfish. That kind of thinking pulled me into a spiral. I'd sit at my desk at work, staring at spreadsheets, but not really seeing them. I'd walk home in the evenings, earbuds in, but no music playing, just replaying conversations in my head. I started skipping meals without realizing it. My fridge went nearly empty because I didn't have the energy to go grocery shopping. The loneliness hit harder than I expected. For years, even though I knew my family leaned on me, there had still been the illusion of closeness. The phone calls, the texts, the endless updates, they had been manipulative, yes, but they were also connection. Now, with that gone, my phone sat silent. The silence I'd wanted so badly felt unbearable. On the worst nights, I'd pick up my phone, thumb hovering over the unblock option. Just one tap, and I'd hear my mom's voice again. I could almost imagine it. Oh, honey, we were so worried. Of course we'll put this behind us. We love you. And for a split second, I almost believed it. Almost. But then I'd remember the bills. The bank transfer. The lie about Thanksgiving. I'd set the phone down again, my chest aching, but my resolve intact. What made it worse was how my family didn't stop their games. They just got more creative. One afternoon, as I was leaving work, I found Chris waiting outside my office building. My older brother, taller, broader, with that smug half-smile that always made me feel 12 years old again. Hey, little bro, he said, stepping into stride beside me. You've been hard to reach. I didn't respond. I just kept walking, hoping he'd take the hint. He didn't. Look, Mom and Dad are really hurting. You freezing the account like that? Not cool. You know they depend on you. I stopped in my tracks and turned to him. They tried to steal from me, Chris. Do you get that? That's not depending. That's theft. He rolled his eyes, like I'd just said something childish. You're being dramatic. They were just desperate. You know how it is. You've always been the one who can handle things. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I wanted to punch him. Instead, I clenched my fists at my sides and said, "Get out of my way." Chris leaned in, lowering his voice. "You can play tough, but we both know you'll cave. You always do. Sooner or later, you'll come back around." That night, I locked my door 3 times before bed. It felt like everywhere I turned, the walls were closing in. My aunt left voicemails telling me how worried she was about my parents' health. My cousins posted snide comments on social media about selfish people who forget where they come from. Even a family friend I hadn't spoken to in years reached out on Facebook Messenger, saying, "Your mom says you're being cold. Don't let money ruin your bond." I wanted to scream. They weren't even hiding it anymore. They were rallying the entire extended family to shame me back into compliance. The pressure got to me. One night, after a particularly brutal day at work, I sat on my couch with a bottle of whiskey I'd picked up on the walk home. I'm not much of a drinker, but that night I poured glass after glass until the room blurred. I wanted to stop feeling, stop thinking. At some point, I passed out on the couch with the TV still on. When I woke up the next morning, my head pounding, my phone buzzed with a text from James, my coworker. "Hey man, you okay? You didn't show up today," and didn't answer. I stared at that message, my stomach sinking. I hadn't even realized I'd missed work. That was the moment it hit me. I was unraveling. My family wasn't just taking my money anymore. They were taking pieces of me. My time, my peace, my health. That realization scared me sober. I poured the rest of the whiskey down the sink, opened my blinds, and sat on the floor with a notebook. For the first time in weeks, I let myself think about me, not them. What did I want? The answer came slowly, but it was clear. I wanted distance. I wanted freedom. I wanted a life where I wasn't the family ATM, where I wasn't manipulated into thinking love equaled sacrifice. I wasn't ready to cut all ties just yet, not emotionally. But I started planning. Quietly. Methodically. The first step was locking down my finances completely. I opened a new bank account at a different institution, transferred my savings, and set up new direct deposits. I froze my credit, too, after learning they'd been using my information. The woman at the credit bureau desk gave me a sympathetic look when I explained why. I just nodded, too embarrassed to say more. The second step was protecting my space. I installed a security camera by my apartment door. I changed the locks, even though it cost me more than I wanted to spend. I started telling my building manager to let me know if any family members showed up. The third step was harder, emotional distance. I stopped checking their social media. Stopped scrolling through Ashley's endless posts about family first. I muted everything. It hurt, like ripping off a bandage and exposing the raw skin underneath, but it was necessary. And yet, even as I made those steps, the loneliness deepened. On Friday night, I sat alone in my apartment while I could hear laughter drifting in from the bar down the street. Groups of friends, co-workers, families, living lives that didn't revolve around manipulation and guilt. I wanted that so badly it hurt, but I didn't know how to reach for it. That weekend, my mom tried again. A letter this time slipped into my mailbox in her delicate cursive handwriting. "Dear Evan, we didn't mean to hurt you. You're our son, and we love you. But love means sacrifice, and sometimes you have to put family above your pride. Please don't let this break us apart. We need you. You're the only one we can count on." I read that letter twice, then folded it neatly and set it in a drawer. I didn't tear it up, didn't throw it out. But I couldn't answer, either. The words, "we need you," burned more than any insult could. Because what I realized, sitting there in that too quiet apartment, was that I'd hit rock bottom. I was drained, isolated, and heartbroken. But for the first time, I could see the pattern clearly. And seeing it was the first step to breaking it. The question was, how? Hitting rock bottom wasn't dramatic for me. There wasn't some movie-style scene where I shouted into the night or stormed into my parents' house demanding answers. No, it was quiet, subtle, more like standing in the wreckage of a storm and realizing I was still alive, even if I was cut, even if I was bruised. And from there, slowly, I began to rebuild. It started small, almost too small to notice at first. I began cooking again. Nothing fancy, just pasta, chicken, some roasted vegetables. But after weeks of surviving on takeout and vending machine snacks, it felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I remember standing in my kitchen, stirring a pot of sauce, and realizing I couldn't remember the last time I'd done something just for me. No one else's needs factored in. No panic calls. No surprise bills. Just me, my meal, and silence. Then came sleep. For weeks I'd been tossing and turning, haunted by texts and emails. But with my new bank account locked down and my family's social media muted, my phone stayed dark. The silence that once felt unbearable now felt like peace. I slept through the night for the first time in months. Those two changes, food and sleep, didn't fix everything, but they gave me clarity. At work, I noticed the fog lifting. My numbers improved. I stopped staring blankly at spreadsheets and actually started crushing projects again. James, my coworker, clapped me on the back one afternoon and said, "Man, whatever you're doing, keep it up. You're on fire lately." That encouragement gave me momentum. I poured myself into my career with a focus I hadn't had in years. For so long, every paycheck had been sliced and siphoned off to cover someone else's emergencies. But now, it was mine, all mine. And the more I worked, the more I realized how much I'd been holding myself back by carrying everyone else's weight. A few weeks into this new rhythm, my boss called me into his office. I half expected a reprimand. Old habits die hard. But instead, he grinned. "Evan, I've been watching you. Your work with the Daniels account was outstanding. We've been talking upstairs, and we think you're ready for more responsibility. How would you feel about leading a small team?" I must have looked shocked because he laughed. "Don't look so surprised. You've earned it." When I left his office that day, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride. Real, unfiltered pride that wasn't tangled up in whether or not I'd pleased my parents. The promotion wasn't huge. It didn't come with fireworks or a six-figure salary, but it was mine. A milestone I'd reached on my own. Around the same time, I decided to get my health in order. The stress of the past few months had left me drained, pale, and heavier than I wanted to admit. So I joined a gym a block away from my apartment. The first few weeks were rough, my body ached, and I felt clumsy on the machines, but there was something almost therapeutic about it. Each drop of sweat felt like letting go of years of frustration. I wasn't just working out my body. I was working out the resentment, the anger, the grief. I also started journaling. Not every day, but often enough to track my thoughts. I'd write down the things my family had said to me, their words that once felt like gospel. Family means obligation. You're the only responsible one. Don't make a big deal out of it. And then, next to each phrase, I'd write my response. My truth. Obligation isn't love. Being responsible doesn't mean being exploited. It is a big deal. Those pages became my evidence, my reminders when the guilt crept back in. And yet, despite the progress, there were setbacks. One night, after a long day at work, I got a text from an unknown number. "Your parents are ashamed of you. You've changed. You're cold." I didn't reply, but it stung. The guilt still lived inside me like an old scar, ready to ache when pressed. Still, I didn't cave. Instead, I took that pain and funneled it into something new. I started looking at investments. With extra money piling up from no longer funding my parents' lives, I finally had breathing room. I met with a financial advisor who looked at me like I'd been living under a rock when I explained how much I'd been giving away each year. "You've been subsidizing their lives at the expense of your own future," she said bluntly. Hearing it from a professional, not just my inner voice, was like being doused with cold water. She helped me set up a portfolio, small but steady. For the first time, I was putting money toward my future instead of patching holes in theirs. The more control I gained, the more I noticed something else: confidence. Not the loud, showy kind, but a quiet steadiness. I walked straighter. I spoke with more certainty. I stopped apologizing at work for things that weren't my fault. I stopped apologizing in my head for not picking up my mom's calls. And with that confidence came a new perspective. I started to see my family for what they really were, not what I'd always wanted them to be. Every voicemail, every note, every snide social media comment, they weren't signs of love. They were signs of desperation, signs that their grip on me was slipping. That realization was liberating. I began saying yes to things outside of work. When James invited me out for drinks, I went. When a colleague asked if I wanted to join their trivia night, I said yes. Slowly, I was building something I hadn't realized I was missing: a chosen family. People who liked me for me, not for what I could give. One evening, after a trivia game where our team lost spectacularly, I walked home laughing. Really laughing, the kind that makes your stomach hurt. And as I climbed the stairs to my apartment, I realized it had been months since I'd felt that way. That night, I pulled out the letter my mom had written and read it one last time. Love means sacrifice, it said. But I finally saw it for the manipulation it was. Love doesn't mean sacrifice. It means care, respect, mutual support. What I had with my parents wasn't love. It was dependency dressed up as devotion. I tore the letter in half. Not in anger, not in a fit of rage. Just calmly, as a symbol. A quiet promise to myself that I wasn't going back. And then something unexpected happened. At work, my performance and leadership on the new team caught more attention. Within 3 months, I was offered another raise, modest but steady. My savings grew faster. My investments started showing small returns. For once, my future felt like it belonged to me. It was in this new life, this new confidence, that I began to think, not just about survival, but about something more. Because here's the truth. You can only be pushed so far before you push back. I'd survived their lies. I'd survived their theft. I'd survived rock bottom. Now, with a stronger foundation under me than ever before, a dangerous thought started to take root. What if I didn't just walk away? What if I made sure they finally understood, once and for all, that I wasn't theirs to use anymore? The thing about climbing out of rock bottom is that once you're back on steady ground, you start seeing the world differently. It's like my eyes had adjusted to the darkness for so long that when I finally stepped into the light, everything looked sharper, cleaner. Opportunities one would have ignored before now stood out like neon signs. And in that clarity, I began to notice patterns, weaknesses in my family's armor, cracks they'd never want me to see. It started innocently enough. One night, James and I were walking back from dinner after work, and he mentioned how his sister had burned him years ago by opening a credit card in his name. He told me about how he discovered it, how he froze his credit, how he even got copies of the application she forged. I listened, nodding, then asked quietly, "What did you do about it?" He smirked. "I reported her. Nearly ruined her financially. She learned real quick not to mess with me." That story stuck with me. I hadn't thought about it in those terms before. Reporting, documentation, leverage. My family had done something eerily similar with the bills and the attempted transfer. And while part of me was still reeling from the betrayal, another part, colder, sharper, realized something important. They had left a trail. I dug out the stack of envelopes again, the ones with my name as the payer. I studied the details, looked up account numbers, even called the customer service line pretending I was verifying the switch. And sure enough, the rep on the other end confirmed. The billing information had been changed manually. Someone had called in with my personal info. That night, I started keeping a folder. Every bill, every text, every email. I printed screenshots of my bank's fraud alert, clipped the voicemail transcript from my dad, even noted the date and time Chris slipped that note under my door. For years, I'd let their words float around me like smoke, choking but impossible to hold. Now, I was collecting the smoke, making it solid. The folder grew thicker each week, and with it, my sense of control grew. Around this time, work gave me another unexpected boost. My team's project landed us a high-profile client, and I was invited to sit in on meetings with executives. Suddenly, I wasn't just another mid-level employee. I was being seen as leadership material. That visibility meant higher pay down the line, but more importantly, it meant influence. Connections. One executive, a sharp woman named Lydia, took a liking to me. Over coffee one day, she asked me about my background. I hesitated, then admitted I didn't have much family support. She raised an eyebrow, leaned back in her chair, and said, "Good. Makes you dangerous. People with nothing to lose are harder to control." Her words lit something inside me. Dangerous. That was never a word I'd applied to myself before. But maybe it fit now. The next piece of the puzzle came by accident. One Saturday afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. On the other end was a voice I recognized. Mr. Thompson, the old landlord from my parents' neighborhood. "Evan. Hey, listen, I didn't know who else to call. Your folks are late on rent again." I blinked. "Rent? They own their house." There was a pause. "No, son. They haven't owned that place in years. They sold it." "What, 5, 6 years back? Been renting ever since. Haven't you been the one covering it?" My stomach dropped. I sat there, gripping the phone, trying to process. Sold the house. Renting. All those times they'd told me I was helping with the mortgage, they'd lied. lied about owning the house, lied about equity, lied about what my money was even paying for. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. Not from hurt this time, but from anger so clean and sharp it almost felt like relief. Because now I had proof. Proof they weren't just manipulative. They were liars, through and through. And that meant one thing. If they were lying to me, they were lying to others. I started asking quiet questions. Reaching out to people who'd known my parents for years, casually dropping into conversations at local shops when I visited their town. What I learned made my blood run cold. My parents had borrowed money from half the neighborhood, promising to pay it back when Evan helps us out. They'd used my name as collateral, waving around my career as if it were a blank check. And suddenly, I saw the bigger picture. They weren't just using me privately, they were using me publicly. I was their safety net, their excuse, their bargaining chip. That realization turned my folder into something else entirely. No longer just a collection of hurt, it was ammunition. I doubled down on building my independence. I maxed out my 401k contributions. I opened a side account to funnel money into a down payment for a condo, something completely mine. I picked up freelance consulting gigs, padding my income and expanding my network. With every extra dollar, with every new contact, I felt myself rising higher, further away from the pit they'd shoved me into. And as I rose, I began to think strategically. My parents' biggest weakness wasn't money. It was reputation. They cared deeply about appearances, the perfect Thanksgiving, the polished stories they told neighbors, the illusion of stability. They needed people to believe they were respectable, loving parents, holding it together with dignity. That was their mask, and I now had the power to rip it off. Because tucked in my folder were not just bills and bank alerts. There were also screenshots from my cousin's smug Instagram stories, videos of the Thanksgiving feast, complete with captions bragging about how mom and dad pulled it all together despite hard times. Lies, plain as day. And those lies could unravel everything if exposed to the right audience. I didn't move immediately. Revenge, I realized, wasn't about rushing. It was about patience, timing, letting the other side believe they'd won, just long enough for the ground to shift under their feet. So I kept playing the quiet game, ignoring their attempts, declining their requests, answering no one. My silence drove them mad. I could tell from the increasingly desperate messages that slipped through from new numbers. But inside that silence, I was planning. I met with Lydia again, casually bringing up the idea of family manipulation in a general sense. She leaned in, curious, and when I told her a sanitized version of my story, she gave me a look I'll never forget. A mix of admiration and something sharper. "Evan," she said, "if you ever decide you want to turn the tables, make sure you do it in a way they can't recover from. Otherwise, they'll keep crawling back." Her advice echoed in my head long after the meeting ended. Don't just push back. End it. And that's when I knew I wasn't just going to escape. I was going to make sure they could never use me or anyone else like that again. The setup was almost complete. I had the evidence. I had the leverage. I had the independence and the growing success to withstand whatever storm came next. All that was left was choosing the moment. They always taught me that revenge was messy, childish, and never worth it. For years, I wanted to believe them. But what I learned in the months I'd been building back up was that there's a difference between lashing out and finishing a problem. What I planned wasn't violence or humiliation for its own sake. It was exposure, accountability, and a way to make sure the people who treated me like a ledger could no longer hide behind stories and smiles. I wanted them to feel the cost of a lifetime of lies. I also wanted to be able to look at myself in the mirror and know I had done it cleanly. No illegal tricks, no cheap shots, just the truth on a table they couldn't sweep away. The plan came together in quiet steps, the same way I'd rebuilt the rest of my life. Small moves, deliberate, with time between each one to let the consequences unfold. First, I made sure everything I'd collected was ironclad. The folders I'd been printing and saving, bank alerts, dates and times of attempts, screenshots of the Instagram stories from that Thanksgiving, copies of the utility envelopes with my name listed as payer, were organized, chronologically labeled, and backed up in an encrypted drive. I transcribed voicemails and saved every message that slipped through the blocks. I had names and contact info from people who'd spoken to me. Mr. Thompson, the landlord who told me my parents didn't own the house, the customer service rep who confirmed the billing changes, Lydia, who had a knack for strategy. I converted everything into a packet that would make sense to an outsider. Facts, timelines, and supporting documentation. Next, I reached out to two people who would be careful and useful. The first was Lydia, the executive who'd encouraged me to be dangerous in the right way. I didn't tell her I was planning anything dramatic. I asked for advice on how to present documents, how to make a clear narrative out of scattered evidence. She recommended a local consumer advocate who had helped others in weird family financial entanglements. The advocate listened without judgment, then said a thing I'd needed to hear. Sometimes the best revenge is making sure the truth is public enough that they can't keep doing it to someone else. She agreed to review my materials and help me draft letters to the right people: banks, utilities, and the one local news outlet that ran a human interest segment about community scams 2 years earlier. The second person was someone more personal, Mr. Thompson, the landlord. He was gruff but straightforward. When I told him I had evidence my parents had been telling neighbors and lenders that they owned their house when they'd been renting, he didn't hesitate. "We've all been too polite about it," he said. "If you want the truth told, I'll back you up." He agreed to provide copies of lease records and to allow me to share his name if needed. I did something else. I tightened up my legal standing. I scheduled a meeting with an attorney who specialized in consumer fraud and family law, not to sue for drama, but to understand my options and make sure I stayed on the right side of things. The lawyer was blunt. There are tools for victims, fraud reports, credit freezes, demands for investigation, but you have to be willing to show your work and accept that the fallout may be public. That was the part one had to be ready for. The lawyer helped me draft a cease and desist template and an affidavit if I needed to file one. She also advised me on escalation. Start with neutral institutions, banks, utility companies. Then, if they refuse to act, allow the advocate to notify the media and community groups. Her final line was important. Control the narrative. If you wait until they tell their side first, you'll always be 2 steps behind. So I controlled the narrative. I started with the banks. I filed fraud reports detailing the attempted transfer and the suspicious activity surrounding my account. I handed the bank the transcribed voicemail from my dad and screenshots proving my mother had been present the day I set up old credentials. The bank's fraud team took it seriously. There was a real attempt to access my funds, and my documentation supported a pattern of unauthorized access. They reinstated additional protections and confirmed, in writing, that there'd been a legitimate attempt to move money without my authorization. That written confirmation became a crucial piece of evidence. At the same time, I contacted the utilities. I sent copies of the envelopes and the change of billing confirmations to the utility fraud departments, asking for an investigation into how my information had been used. One company uncovered a history of phone requests to alter account names that matched the dates on my envelopes. Another confirmed the caller had provided enough personal details to pass verification. In each case, the companies flagged the accounts and placed official notes indicating possible identity misuse. I requested records be sent to me directly, which they did. Then I did something more public. I wrote a short, factual letter to the small community paper that covered our town, the one that ran human interest pieces and occasionally covered local consumer warnings. I kept it terse, a timeline, the facts, and an offer to speak with the editor in person with the documentation. I did not embellish. I didn't go to social media and start an attack post. I wanted the outlet to see the materials first, free from the noise of rage. The editor agreed to meet. Meeting with the editor felt oddly like sitting down for jury duty. I laid everything out. The bank alert email, the envelopes with my name listed as payer, Mr. Thompson's lease records, the screenshots of their Instagram celebrations, and the transcribed voicemail where my dad pleaded that family was everything while their actions suggested otherwise. The editor read, asked a few sharp questions, and promised to look into the community angle. "If what you're saying is true," she said, "this is bigger than a family fight. People have a right to know if neighbors are using other people's names as cover." While the editor did background checks, I took another step. I quietly contacted a few neighbors who'd been at that Thanksgiving without making a spectacle. I didn't call them out for being complicit. I offered facts and asked if anyone would be willing to speak to me or the editor about what they'd seen. 2 people agreed. They were nervous, but when they realized this wasn't a smear campaign, just documentation and a request for truth, they provided statements about what they'd witnessed and how they'd been told different stories about my parents' finances. Those statements were small, human, and devastating. The landlord who thought the payments were my idea. The grocery store owner who'd once given them credit based on the idea that Evan helped us out. It painted a picture of a family whose facade depended on my name and the goodwill of others. Everything assembled, I let the institutions act first. The bank issued a formal incident report confirming unauthorized access attempts. The utilities opened fraud investigations and attached notations to the accounts. The attorney drafted a letter threatening legal action if my parents attempted to use my name again without explicit consent. Those letters went to their inboxes, served through certified mail, so there would be a record. When the mail marked delivered, the tenor of the family's messages shifted from pleading to panic. "Please don't do this to us," one message had said in the early days. Now the messages were terse and evasive. The paper ran a dry, careful piece. Local resident alleges fraud against family. Investigations underway. It wasn't sensational. It quoted the utilities' confirmations, the bank statements, and included a statement that an investigation had been opened. It also noted that several local residents had corroborated seeing evidence that contradicted what had been told publicly about the family's finances. The article didn't name people beyond myself and the landlord who'd agreed to speak, but it did make it clear there was smoke. The reaction was immediate. The landlord shared copies of eviction notices he'd never served. Old paperwork that showed the family had been on shaky ground for years. Neighbors who'd once lent money quietly began asking for repayments. An ex-business partner of my father's reached out to me, out of the blue, to ask if he could speak on record. He had a story about unpaid debts and promises that never materialized. The ripple effect was real and messy. People were embarrassed. People were furious. The family's cushion, the one built on other people's goodwill and my quiet payments, was shrinking. I watched all of it unfold with an odd mix of satisfaction and sadness. It hurt to see people I grew up with humiliated. It hurt to watch parents scramble. But for the first time since I was a teenager, the shame and the scramble were theirs, not mine. They had to face consequences, to explain themselves to others, to answer tough questions. They had to see what happens when the safety net you relied on becomes something that others refuse to sew back together for you. And still, even as the community turned and the bills got called in, there were surprises. My mom sent me a text, one of those messages that tries to be casual but betrays panic. "People are asking questions. This is getting out of hand. Please help calm things. We can fix this." I didn't answer. My brother called twice and left a voicemail that was half apology, half accusation. My aunt posted a vague plea on Facebook about how family fights become public and ruin reputations. It was all the same script they'd used for years when cornered, guilt plus victim performance. The crucial turning point came on a Saturday morning when a process server showed up at my parents' rental with paperwork, an official notice from one of the utility companies demanding an audit and repayment due to irregular account changes. The notice was public record. It could be pulled by anyone who wanted to see it. My parents called me. Their voices were thin and brittle. They pleaded. They tried to bargain. They offered to explain. I sat on my couch with all my evidence around me and listened to them try to salvage dignity with words that had never meant the same thing as action. After they hung up, my phone filled with cousinly texts, then calls from neighbors, and finally a voicemail from Dad that was almost a whisper. "Please, son, we can fix this. Don't make it worse." I replayed his voicemail 3 times. I felt the old impulses, sympathy, the longing for family, reach toward me like hands I wanted to take. But the thing I'd learned in this whole process was that good intentions said without change are meaningless. I had given them almost everything they'd asked for, and they had used it to build an illusion that protected them while they burned through other people's trust. So I made 2 choices. One was small and private. I went through my folder and added the last piece of evidence I'd been waiting on, an email I'd received from a utility rep confirming the dates of the billing changes. I printed it, placed it on top of the stack, and closed the folder. The second choice was public. I called the editor back, asked for one more meeting, and told her I was ready to go on record fully. I wasn't asking for revenge as vengeance. I was asking for accountability. I wanted the story told in full, with the facts and witnesses, so those who'd helped my parents could see what had happened and make their own decisions. At the meeting, the editor listened, then said, quietly, "This is going to be messy, and it might not have the neat ending you want. People will be angry. There may be legal threats. But if it stops even one person from being used the way you were, it's worth it." I nodded. I was ready. What followed over the next week felt like a slow unspooling of a tight rope. The paper published a fuller follow-up with names and documents. 2 neighbors confirmed on record that they'd been pressured to provide loans. A local pastor who'd once vouched for my parents' standing at church issued a guarded statement about being misled. The landlord filed for an audit of their current lease. A small claims action was filed by a neighbor demanding repayment for an unpaid loan, a suit the neighbor would likely win now that the paper had documented the pattern. Messages came in every tone: anger, betrayal, sorrow, please. Please don't do this to us. One of them wrote. The same line that had rung hollow so many months before, now echoed back with a desperate sincerity that made my chest tighten. I sat with that line and realized how easily people can use those words, both as a shield and as a real cry for help. My anger softened for a moment into a strange sympathy. But every time I let it soften too much, I remembered the attempted transfer on my account and the envelopes with my name as payer, and I hardened again. Sympathy without change is a trap. By the time I finished part 7 of what I'd started, their world had shifted. They were no longer able to rely on me to fix everything quietly. Neighbors were asking for the money they'd been promised. Utilities were auditing accounts. The bank had flagged long patterns of suspicious activity. People who once dismissed me as dramatic were now asking questions. My parents' house of cards was wobbling. I wasn't naive. I knew this might not be the end. There would be angry calls, lawyers, maybe even threats of lawsuits. There would be faces at family gatherings I'd never see the same way again. I also knew I might miss them in ways I couldn't explain. That was the trade-off. But for the first time in a long time, the trade felt like my choice, not something forced on me by guilt or manipulation. And so I waited, watching the dominoes fall. I had done what I set out to do. I'd exposed the pattern, documented it cleanly, and forced institutions and the community to respond. I'd left a paper trail and given voices to people who'd been brushed aside. What I hadn't done yet was decide what to do if they came back begging, not to the neighbors or the utilities, but to me. Would I forgive? Would I accept a contrite, "We were wrong," and move on? Or would I finally hold the line I had drawn and let the consequences play out? The answer was not immediate. The next message that would pop up on my phone might tilt everything one way or another. And when it came, I knew I'd be tested in a way that made the months of planning look small. I had started the avalanche. Now I had to decide if I would watch it run its course, or step back in and try to catch the pieces. Fallout is never clean. I knew that from the start, but I wasn't prepared for how messy it would truly be. Once the story broke in the local paper, the chain reaction spread faster than I'd imagined. My parents' names weren't plastered in headlines, but people in their circle knew who it was about. The whispers began almost immediately. At first, the calls to me came frantic. My mom left voicemails that swung between rage and begging. One minute she accused me of destroying our family's good name. The next she sobbed about how she didn't know what else to do. My dad's messages were colder. Short, clipped lines like, "You've made a mistake. We could have handled this quietly." Or, "You think you're punishing us, but you'll regret this." But the tone shifted as the weeks passed. Neighbors stopped lending them money. The grocery store owner they'd leaned on for years refused to let them run a tab. The church they'd attended quietly pulled them off the volunteer committee once questions started circulating about finances. Even Ashley, the cousin who'd once bragged online about the best Thanksgiving ever, went silent after the article. It turned out her friends didn't think it was so funny when they realized the feast they flaunted had been funded on a pile of lies. The utilities sent formal notices. Accounts would need to be rectified, balances repaid, or services cut off. The bank issued a written warning about attempted fraud, placing their household under increased scrutiny. And then came the worst for them. The landlord, Mr. Thompson, filed to evict after unpaid balances stacked too high. I learned about the eviction not from them, but from a neighbor who messaged me on Facebook. "Your parents are moving out. Looks like they finally got caught." I drove past the house a week later, slowly, as if approaching a crime scene. The once pristine yard was overgrown, boxes piled by the curb. My father stood outside, arguing with a man holding paperwork. My mother sat on the porch, head in her hands. For a moment, guilt twisted in my stomach. This was still my family. But then I remembered the stack of envelopes with my name, the attempted transfer from my account, the years of lies. This wasn't my doing. This was theirs. The real kicker came when Chris, my brother, reached out. He'd always been smug, the enforcer of my parents' guilt trips. But his tone had changed. His voicemail was unsteady. "Evan, it's Chris. Look, I know we've butted heads. But things are bad. They're blaming me now, saying I should have helped more, that it's my fault you turned on them. I don't know what to do. I don't know." For the first time, he sounded small, like he'd finally tasted the role I'd played for so long. I didn't return the call. I couldn't. Maybe that was harsh, but I wasn't ready to become anyone's savior again. Not his, not theirs. Word of their collapse spread wider than I anticipated. The local paper ran a follow-up when the eviction filing became public record. This time, the piece was less careful. It linked the dots more directly. Fraudulent billing, unpaid debts, reliance on their son's finances, now culminating in eviction. It wasn't salacious, but it was damning. After that, the phone calls stopped. The messages dwindled. The silence that had once felt unbearable now felt like victory. In the aftermath, my life didn't explode into fireworks. There was no parade, no dramatic showdown with my parents where I delivered a monologue. Instead, the change was quieter. My shoulders felt lighter. My sleep came easier. At work, I thrived. I bought the condo I'd been saving for, moved in with no one's name on the lease but mine. I hosted my own Thanksgiving that year, small, just a few coworkers and new friends. But it was the first holiday I'd ever laughed through without wondering how much it would cost me later. I sometimes caught myself thinking of them, wondering if they'd land on their feet, if they'd rebuild somewhere else, if they'd ever see me as more than a bank. But whenever those thoughts tugged too hard, I'd open the folder I kept, the one full of evidence, the one that had started it all. I'd flip through the papers, the bills with my name, the printed voicemails. I'd remember exactly why I had done it. One evening, months after the dust settled, I got a final letter in the mail. No return address, but I knew the handwriting instantly, my mother's. "Evan, we don't understand why you turned on us the way you did. We only ever wanted the best for the family. You've humiliated us, destroyed everything we built. We can't forgive you for this. But know this, you will regret it when we're gone, when you realize family is all you had. Goodbye." I read it twice, then set it down. There was no anger in me anymore. No urge to reply, no guilt, no ache. Just a calm certainty that I had finally broken the chain. I placed the letter in the folder, closed it, and slid it to the back of my closet. Not to be forgotten, but to be remembered as proof of what I'd survived. That night, I sat on my balcony, looking out over the city lights, a glass of wine in hand. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't waiting for the phone to buzz with demands. I wasn't bracing for guilt. I wasn't calculating how much I could give without breaking myself. I was free, and as the cool night air settled around me, I whispered the final words I knew I would never say to them, but needed to say to myself. I am not your bank. I am not your lifeline. I am not your obligation. I am me, and you will never use me again.